Our story begins with a man who realized he had made a terrible mistake after undergoing a procedure at the hospital. The white blood cells had already spread throughout his entire body, but upon hearing the news, he didn't get angry. On the contrary, he clutched the peace amulet his wife had left him and began to laugh, believing only this kind of end could console her soul. But when he opens his eyes again, what we see is the old farmhouse right outside the window. There it was, that word, happiness, now covered in a thick layer of dust. He quickly searched every corner of the house, inside and out, until he found Lin Qingshui curled up on the earthen bed. In that moment, her large eyes held a gaze of deadly, hollow stillness. Her body, once white and flawless, was now marked by a web of crisscrossing scars. Seeing the woman who had haunted his thoughts for most of his life, he was instantly overcome with emotion. He rushed over to pull her into an embrace, but the regrets and longings he wanted to voice stayed stuck in his throat. And then, he wept with bitter grief, remembering how in his past life he had schemed for Lin Qingshui to fall into the reservoir. Because he was the one to rescue her, she was forced to marry him just to save her reputation. But Lin Qingshui never knew a single day of peace from the moment she entered his home, enduring his constant domestic violence. Eventually, she took her own life by jumping into the reservoir with their child, and it wasn't until later that their bodies were recovered. It was only then, standing over the mother and daughter by the river, that he finally realized the gravity of his mistake. Afterward, though he rode the wave of the era's boom and amassed a fortune he couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes, the woman who had taught him how to grow through her own sacrifice was gone forever. And so, just as he was immersing himself in the pure joy of this second chance, he suddenly heard a cry of pure rage. "Get out! Don't touch me!" In that moment, we see Lin Qingshui trembling uncontrollably, her entire body shaking with fear. He remembered that this time, Lin Qingshui had borrowed money from her family just to buy rice milk for the child. But he had taken it from her, of course, just to buy more wine. And worse, after coming home drunk, he had brutally mistreated her in their bed, a memory that now filled him with absolute loathing. Thinking of this, he raised his hand and began to slap himself across the face with everything he had. Before long, we see blood beginning to trickle from the corner of his mouth. Lin Qingshui watched his actions in silence, unable to stop a sarcastic, hollow smile from forming on her lips. To be honest, she had lost count of how many times this exact scene had played out. After all, every time he woke up from a drunken stupor, he would kneel and beg for her forgiveness. But within 2 days, his fists and feet would inevitably fall upon Lin Qingshui once again. He could endure her silent curses now, but Lin Qingshui couldn't bear the thought of their baby having nothing to eat. The baby's weak, hungry cry sparked a faint glimmer of life back into Lin Qingshui's beautiful eyes. She hurriedly threw on her clothes and gathered her daughter into her arms. Because Lin Qingshui had suffered from malnutrition for so long, the little one couldn't get any milk from her. The child began to wail, and those cries jolted him into action as he scrambled to pick up his clothes from the floor. He told her to wait, promising he would find something for their little girl to eat. With that, he dashed out of the house, running as fast as he could toward the village shop. Old Juan, the shopkeeper, saw him approaching and asked a question through a grin of yellowed teeth. He wondered what he wanted this time, the usual cheap wine, or perhaps something luxurious, like packaged rice milk. He demanded the rice milk, while Old Juan stared at his trembling fingers and the swollen slap marks on his face. Without saying a word, the old man simply reached up and pulled a bag of rice milk from the shelf. He offered his thanks with genuine gratitude and hurried back home as fast as his legs could carry him. Upon arriving, we see that his wife hadn't moved an inch since he left, still frozen in that same state of despair. He felt another sharp pang in his heart as he called out, telling her he had finally bought the rice milk. But at the sound of his voice, Lin Qingshui immediately pulled back, putting herself on guard. Her pale face was a mask of pure terror, drained of all color. She warned him then, with a voice trembling with desperation, not to even think about selling their daughter. If he did, she swore she would curse his entire Zhao family to extinction. Seeing her react this way, he stood paralyzed on the spot, unable to move. He remembered then that he had actually planned something that monstrous, to sell his own child just for more wine money. He wondered what kind of absolute idiot could have ever done such a thing. It was no wonder his previous life ended in ruin, buried under the weight of high-interest loans. It was well-deserved, really. So, he quietly placed the rice milk on the old bed. He swore to her right then that he would never, ever sell their little girl. He promised to find work in town the very next day, and after saying this, he turned and walked out. Once he was outside, he couldn't help but slap himself across the face a few more times. If his memory served him, this was the very yard where Lin Qingshui had once jumped into the reservoir with their daughter. The mere thought of that moment made his entire body tremble with a cold, biting fear. Seeing that it was getting late and there was no food left, he reached the foot of the mountain 20 minutes later. There, on the back of the mountain, he took the elastic band from his own underwear to improvise a tool. He fashioned a makeshift slingshot and, with a sudden thwack, sent a stone flying into the brush. A turtle dove flapped its wings and took flight. In his previous life, after becoming wealthy, he had developed a real passion for shooting. He had also spent quite a bit of time playing with slingshots back then. After crouching in the grass for nearly half the day, he finally managed to catch a pheasant with a net. He also managed to take down a few turtle doves using his makeshift slingshot. The doves were quite small, even 4 of them together didn't weigh much more than a pound. The pheasant, however, was a different story, weighing in at about 5 pounds. As time passed, we see him find a sturdy vine and hang his catch from a nearby branch. He was preparing to head home when, suddenly, he felt a strange, light tug on his back. Everything had vanished. The shock was so sudden that he broke out in a cold sweat. Had he encountered a ghost? Then, his eyes fell upon the peace amulet hanging from his neck. It was glowing. This was the very same charm his wife had kept close to her body in his former life. It wasn't made of jade or plastic. She had left it on the reservoir bank before taking her own life. As he looked at it more closely, the mysterious light from the amulet faded away. It happened again, and he simply couldn't resist reaching out to touch it. In the very next second, he entered a space that was barely even the size of his old hospital room. After a few experiments, he understood that by squeezing the amulet, he could enter this place. And by simply focusing his mind on leaving, he could return to the outside world. With this advantage, he could finally forge a new path for his family in this different time. While many families already had electricity, his home was still stuck using old oil lamps. The hardest years of the natural disasters had already passed, but life remained a struggle. Incredibly, he hadn't forgotten how to survive, but even so, the next meal was never a guarantee. After total darkness had fallen, he headed straight into the kitchen with his catch. He served a large bowl of pheasant soup and carried it into the main living area. "Come in, come eat," he called out. "I made pheasant soup to help with the nursing." After he called her 3 times, Lin Qingshui slowly emerged from the room, her eyes landing on the large bowl of soup. She didn't rush toward him. She simply stood there, her eyes filled with a deep, lingering resentment. At that moment, seeing his wife's clothes covered in patches, he felt another sharp pang of reality. Seeing her like that filled his heart with bitterness. In this era of scarcity, Lin Qingshui remained striking, yet he had been a complete fool. He had won her heart and failed to value it, and now she looked at him with nothing but caution. He understood that as long as he stayed, she wouldn't touch her chopsticks, so he decided to eat in the kitchen. After saying that, he turned and left, while Lin Qingshui remained there, staring at the steaming bowl of pheasant soup. A sense of unreality washed over her. She wondered, quite naturally, if she was simply dreaming. Was this perhaps a final meal? In the past, if there was food, he always ate first while she was left with nothing. So, despite her hunger, Lin Qingshui didn't dare touch the food until he had finally walked out the door. She saw him crouching under the window sipping soup, and noticing the pheasant in the kitchen, she guessed he'd been hunting. Lin Qingshui returned to the main room, picked up the bowl, and finally began to eat her fill. Once again, under his wife's wary gaze, he took it upon himself to wash the dishes, a far cry from the man he used to be. This was likely the very first time he had ever done a single household chore in this home. Reflecting on his past mistakes, he heated a pot of water and brought it to the room so Qin could wash up. After setting down the basin, he left quickly and sat by the door for a long, quiet time. Inside the room, only the faint sound of splashing water could be heard, while he looked up at the starry sky, planning how to earn some money tomorrow. He knew he had to improve the family's situation as quickly as possible, especially now that autumn had already arrived. In winter, the temperature drops to 20 degrees below zero, turning all water into solid ice. His wife and children desperately needed new cotton clothes, otherwise, they simply wouldn't survive the coming winter. After hearing the sound of the water stop, he stood up and entered the room, but his sudden appearance startled her. Lin Qingshui was terrified, instinctively recoiling and backing away from him repeatedly. Seeing this, he cursed himself for his past cruelty, realizing her heart wouldn't heal overnight, so he spoke to her in a gentle tone. "I only came in to take the water out," he told her softly, trying to ease her visible fear. After saying that, he reached down and picked up the basin of water from the floor. As he stepped outside, Lin Qingshui ignored him, moving quickly to put her clothes back on the moment he left. In the courtyard, he used the warm water his wife had finished with to wash himself briefly. After all, catching those pheasants had been messy work. He had spent a long time crawling through the grass, and after washing, he sat on the threshold, reflecting on the experiences of his previous life. We learned that back then, outsiders often wanted to go into the mountains to gather resources, but they were always afraid of getting lost. They had sought him out, since he had nothing better to do, to act as their guide through the wilderness. At the time, he had thought those city folk were simply eccentric and had too much time on their hands. However, he had watched their methods closely and learned exactly how to harvest those valuable mountain products. Now he could go dig them up and sell them himself. Thinking of this, his spirits were instantly lifted. He didn't return home until 4 in the morning, and to be honest, he had been quite lucky during his trek. While coming down the mountain, he had accidentally discovered a burrow belonging to some genets. He managed to pull out several small kits that hadn't even opened their eyes yet. He returned home and prepared them skillfully, leaving one of them in the kitchen for later. After that, he took 2 baskets and headed to the village, which held a market on odd-numbered days. He found a crowded spot and took out the meat and the jinnit skins. A passerby noted the mountain products didn't look bad at all. Originally, he thought they might not sell, and he'd have to take them back to stew for his siblings to eat. However, we see that things took an unexpected turn almost the moment he set up his stall. Someone asked the price of the jinnit meat. An elderly couple saw he was a sturdy young man, well tanned by the sun. At a glance, it was clear he was from the mountains, and since the price was fair, they bought 2 at once. In those days, jinnit meat cost 2,000 euros. Back then, one usually needed meat coupons just to get a decent meal. Mountain products like these were the only option for people wanting to give their grandson something substantial to chew on. Before leaving, the old woman tugged her husband's sleeve and decided to take all the skins too, planning to make gloves for the boy. And so, in less than 2 hours, every single jinnit had already been sold. Next, he took out the larger, more valuable products he had gathered the day before. He went to the most famous pharmacy in town, where the old man behind the counter stared through thick glasses in disbelief. The old man carefully took the items, examined them with a practiced eye, and then signaled a price with his hand. "Little brother, this is the price," he said, but seeing the offer, our protagonist felt a slight frown cross his face. Knowing these mountain treasures were worth more, he reached out to take them back, but the old man quickly stopped him. Stroking his goatee, the old man tried to calm him, suggesting they could negotiate if he wasn't satisfied with the price. 6 large bills, the old man insisted, claiming he simply couldn't offer a single cent more. Deep down, he knew this batch had been slightly damaged by accident during the harvest. Their true value was much higher, but he needed the money urgently, as his wife and children were starving at home. After thinking it over for a moment, he decides to sell, accepting the deal despite the low price. Later, he buys meat and noodles before visiting 2 different supply and marketing cooperatives. Only by doing this does he manage to get powdered milk, a truly rare product in this era. As he carries it home, he can't help but think of the patched clothes his wife was wearing yesterday. And so, he enters the only small supply and marketing shop in the entire village. He rounds a corner to seek out an old hunter, a man well over 70 years old. He gives him a pile of food and manages to trade for the hunting rifle, something very valuable to the old man. In these times, one needed coupons just to eat meat, to achieve the simple freedom of a decent meal. His brother asks where on earth he had been, noting he still had to do everything himself. He had left his wife to work in the fields all alone, which was hardly ideal. Looking at his older brother standing before him, he feels a sudden wave of emotion. He explains he went to town to work and, while there, bought some meat and noodles. He invites his brother to bring his sister-in-law and the children over for dinner tonight. Upon hearing this, the older brother looks him up and down with a clear look of doubt. Noticing the mud stains on his brother's trousers and the full basket, he sees his sister-in-law has only prepared cornmeal. He suggests waiting a bit so that the woman can take a few portions with her. The brother declines the dinner invitation, insisting he should simply treat his own wife well. So, saying nothing more, he simply nods and heads home with the supplies on his back. He knew that to please his wife, he first had to please her stomach, a sensible strategy, really. He begins working in the kitchen, and just as it was getting dark, Lin Qingshui returned home with a few cornmeal buns. As soon as she entered the courtyard, the rich aroma of meat wafting from the kitchen met her senses. She hurried to the kitchen door and saw him standing there by the stove, looking quite busy. And Lin Qingshui, after such a long and exhausting day, was absolutely famished. After setting down the cornmeal buns, she went into the bedroom to lay the sleeping baby in the small bed. But as she turned her head, she noticed a tin of powdered milk sitting right there on the table. In that instant, Lin Qingshui's blood began to boil with a sudden, sharp anger. She slapped him, demanding to know if he had forced her mother to give him money again. How could he be so shameless? Being confronted by his wife, he gradually remembered that his past self really had threatened his mother-in-law for cash. He quickly denied it, of course, insisting that he hadn't done anything of the sort. He explained he earned the money today, and as he spoke, he reached toward his waistband. Seeing this gesture, Lin Qingshui only grew more furious with him. She asked him what on earth he was thinking, acting that way at a time like this. She immediately stepped forward and slapped him again, 2 hits in a row, to be precise. He was left stunned, truly not knowing whether he should laugh or cry at the situation. Seeing that Lin Qingshui had no intention of stopping, he quickly pulled 5 large bills from his waistband. He told her it was the money he earned today and urged her to take it. Lin Qingshui stared down at the bills that had been forced into her hand. She felt a sudden wave of dizziness, looking as though she might collapse right then and there. He reached out to steady her, but Lin Qingshui violently pushed his hand away. She simply couldn't believe it. How could a man known for being so lazy earn that much in a single day? She wondered what shameful things he had done out there, and what on earth they were going to do now. It seemed there was truly no way to go on, as we see that Lin Qingshui didn't believe a single word he said. He nearly fell to his knees before her, explaining that he had gathered wild mushrooms last night and stumbled upon a civet den. He told her those things had been traded for 6 large bills. He had spent 1 to buy food, and now, these were all that remained. At the mention of mountain mushrooms, Lin Qingshui's eyes flickered with a hint of recognition. They say it is ginseng in the north and mountain mushrooms in the south. Those items have high medicinal value and can be sold for good money, but they only grow deep in the mountains. They are incredibly difficult to find, and even more so in the dead of night. But thinking back, she remembered seeing bloodstains by the well earlier that morning. And there was, in fact, civet meat stewing right there in the pot. She began to wonder if she had truly misjudged him this time. Still, she couldn't help but ask herself how he even knew anything about mountain mushrooms. Under Lin Qingshui's watchful gaze, he raised his right hand and swore he hadn't done anything wrong. He went so far as to swear that if he were lying, he should be left without any descendants. Noticing that his wife's breathing had finally begun to steady, and that her eyes were no longer quite so fierce, he let out a long, quiet sigh of relief. He urged Qingshui to put the money away quickly before anyone saw it. He then decided to take some meat over to his elder brother's house so they could have a fresh meal as well. Deep down, he knew it would be safer to hide the money in his secret space, but that would have to wait. As we know, handing over the money to your wife is the same as handing over control of the household. He then took a plate of sautéed civet meat and a stewed fish and tofu soup, placing them carefully on the living room table. After that, he returned to the kitchen to fill a bowl with meat and headed toward his elder brother's house. Along the way, he made sure to set aside some meat for himself, and while he was at it, he stopped to pay Old Wan back for the rice paste. He even settled the debt for his previous drinks, while Lin Qingshui, staring at the large bills in her hand, hurried back inside. In the 2 years since they had been married, he had always been the one snatching money away from her. This was, quite remarkably, the very first time he had ever handed money over voluntarily. And so, she carefully divided the cash into 5 parts and hid them all in separate locations. Once that was done, she heard firm footsteps approaching from outside and stepped out to see the steaming dishes waiting on the table. She felt a sudden wave of dazed confusion, which led her to the kitchen to take a closer look at their supplies. To her surprise, the grain bin was mostly full. The oil jar was topped off as well, and a massive slab of pork belly was hanging right there from the beam. Had he truly changed? Lin Qingshui wasn't sure, as she knew all too well that old habits die hard, especially bad ones. When he saw her sit down, he gently placed a pheasant leg into her bowl. He told her he planned to head to the mountains early tomorrow, wanting to search every possible spot before winter arrived. He was looking for dime officinal. After all, it was the fastest way to make decent money at the moment. He explained that once the country opened up completely, he could use those savings to invest in something else. Upon hearing his words, Lin Qingshui sat there stunned, simply nodding without saying a word. She told herself he had just been lucky last night, but even so, it was better than having no income at all. She felt she could handle his temperament, provided he didn't go out and gamble it all away again. "You can drink as much as you like," he said, as she picked up her chopsticks, intending to return the pheasant leg to the bowl. Seeing this, he quickly used the children as an excuse to stop her, a clever move, to be honest. He told her she was far too thin and needed to eat more, or the children wouldn't have enough milk to drink. Formula milk, no matter how good it might be, simply cannot compare to a mother's own milk. Besides, formula was expensive and quite difficult to find in those days. He explained that this was a special chicken, fish, and tofu soup. He urged her to drink it to help her produce milk, words that made Lin Qingshui look at him with a hint of reproach, her knuckles white as she gripped her chopsticks. But she didn't refuse him again. He had been busy all day and night, and was clearly exhausted. At long last, the problem of the family's survival had finally been resolved. After filling his stomach, he looked at her and said, "Wife, I'm going to sleep." As he spoke, he stood up, leaned over, and went into the bedroom, collapsing onto the bed and falling fast asleep. We wait then for Lin Qingshui to finish washing the dishes and return to the room. Seeing the clothes he had tossed on the floor, she frowned, then picked them up to mend them by the moonlight. Once she had finished her work, she dragged her tired body back toward the bedroom. Quite by accident, she happened to kick the laundry basket. Lin Qingshui picked it up and discovered a set of new clothes for a woman and 3 small outfits for the babies. She stood there staring at the sleeping man for a long time, eventually curling up near him. With her back to him, wearing only an old, torn shirt, he felt a sharp pang of heartache for her. After all, following Lin Qingshui's death in his previous life, he had never looked for another woman again. And so, he reached out and pulled her into an embrace. To him, it all felt like a dream, utterly unreal. Just as he was about to lean down and kiss her, something changed. His wife's body suddenly tensed in his arms. She was clearly resisting his touch, still not quite ready to trust him. And so, he was forced to suppress the deep longing in his heart. He turned away and climbed out of bed, realizing that for now, he simply had to resign himself to this distance. He grabbed some clean clothes from the drying rack and, not caring that they were still damp, threw them on and tiptoed out. He then took the items out of the laundry basket and carefully laid them out on the table. At that moment, Lin Qingshui remained there in bed, watching him. She sat up and told him coldly that if he truly wanted to change, he should go find a proper job. She believed that as long as he worked hard, he could earn 10 yuan a month, and their family could finally live well. Hearing his wife speak to him of her own accord made him feel a surge of happiness, knowing she was actually thinking of his future. But God had given him a chance to live again, and he knew he had to save enough starting capital for when the economy fully opened up. After his wife and daughter had passed away in his previous life, he had wandered the streets like a stray dog. Later, he met a benefactor and got a job as a clerk in a state-owned store, thanks to his charm and smooth way of speaking. He was gradually promoted to manager, which gave him the chance to meet and connect with many powerful figures. In this life, he was determined to rely on his own two hands to earn his first pot of gold as quickly as possible. Therefore, hunting and gathering rare medicinal herbs like dendrobium is the fastest way for him to make money right now. More importantly, he still carries the memories of his previous life, meaning he knows exactly where the best herbs are hidden. With such a perfect opportunity to make money and his knowledge of the future, how could he possibly let it slip away? The only problem is that, for the time being, he has no idea how to explain any of this to his wife. How could he justify his obsession with heading back into the mountains to collect those specific herbs? Seeing that Lin Qingshui remained silent for a long time, he realized she was simply digging in her heels. She simply pulled up the blankets and lay back down, ending the conversation right then and there. He told her that in the kitchen stove pot, there was still some cornmeal food they had left for her. Upon hearing her words, he couldn't help but smile, his face radiating a joy he couldn't possibly hide. He immediately walked over to the front door to finish his preparations. He reminded his wife that he had told his older brother she wouldn't need to go help them today. He suggested that when she had some free time, she should take the pork from the kitchen. He told her to send it to her mother, but Lin Qingshui, seeing him approach, feared she had angered him. She braced herself, thinking he was about to hit her again, never expecting such a gentle surprise. She hadn't quite heard everything he said, but she tossed and turned, unable to fall back asleep. She stayed in bed until the sun was high in the sky, only then hearing a sudden knock at the door. She greeted her sister-in-law, wondering aloud why she had come by so early in the morning. Lu Yua's eyes were already darting toward the kitchen, a flattering, practiced smile on her face. She mentioned she'd heard from the eldest sister-in-law that they had eaten meat at the house last night. She asked, with a hint of suspicion, if the fourth brother had won a lot of money gambling. Without waiting for an answer, her feet seemed to find their own way directly toward the kitchen door. She cried out in shock, wondering if the fourth brother had actually resorted to stealing. She stared at the meat, calculating just how much a piece that large must have cost. It had been nearly half a year since she'd seen such a thing, and she immediately grew restless with envy. She warned her that she must watch her man, as gambling could easily lead him straight to prison. As we see here, Lin Qingshui's expression shifted the moment she heard those words. Her face darkened little by little, a shadow of frustration crossing her features. She asked her sister-in-law what nonsense she was talking about, noting that if he committed a crime, the police would handle it. Lu Yua clearly wanted to argue, but her eyes darted around as if a new thought had just struck her. She quickly swallowed the sharp words that were about to escape her mouth. She told her not to be angry, claiming she was only worried about the fourth brother of the family. She reminded her that her husband and the others were, after all, very close siblings. Then came the real reason for the visit. Her little Xiao Dao was apparently crying for a taste of meat. She asked, with a boldness that was almost impressive, if she could borrow 2.5 kilos of meat. She promised that she would have her husband bring it back later. A likely story, to be honest. After 2 years of living nearby, Lin Qingshui saw through the scheme as clearly as mountain water. She knew exactly what kind of person her sister-in-law was by now. Whatever enters that woman's house never leaves. Yet here she was, asking for 5 pounds of meat. Even if she had the authority to give it away, which she didn't, she wouldn't have dreamed of it. It was simply impossible, and she told her she couldn't make a decision on something so significant. She repeated that she couldn't decide such a thing, telling her sister-in-law to wait for the fourth brother to return. With that, she stepped forward and firmly shut the kitchen door, ending the temptation. Lu Yua, seeing the door close in her face, felt a wave of deep discomfort and annoyance. She told her to remember to speak to him when he got back, still hoping for her prize. She asked for help getting the meat home, but as she turned away, her practiced smile vanished instantly. Here, on the mountain, we see that the rocks are completely bare. With the help of those faint memories from his previous life, he made a tremendous effort. Finally, he found a dendrobium plant growing right there upon the rock. Drawing on yesterday's experience of searching in the dark, he watched as the dendrobium revealed most of its root system. He had reached the end of his search. This plant was much larger than the one from the day before. As darkness began to fall, he carefully extracted the entire large plant. Just as he was preparing to head down the mountain and return home, he stumbled upon a sika deer, which seemed to have come specifically to gnaw on the dendrobium. Upon seeing it, he quickly reached into his space and pulled out a weapon. It was the shotgun he had traded for yesterday. In an instant, the shot echoed through the mountain. The blast startled flocks of birds, which fled in every direction. Meanwhile, back at home, Lin Qingshui had already prepared the meal and warmed the powdered milk for her daughter. When she saw that he hadn't returned yet, a frown crossed her face. She told herself that finding dendrobium isn't easy, and that he still needs to learn a more down-to-earth trait. Just as Lin Qingshui was lost in her thoughts, he quietly entered the courtyard. It wasn't until he began taking things out of the basket that Lin Qingshui, inside the house, heard a noise. Carrying her daughter, she came out and told him to wash his hands and eat. After saying this, still holding the child, she turned and walked away. As the daughter went back inside, he noticed his wife glance at the basket, though she said nothing. After entering the house, he saw the warm food waiting on the table, and his eyes grew moist. Deep down, he wished he could travel back to his former life and beat some sense into his past self. He couldn't fathom how he had failed to appreciate such a virtuous wife, so he simply sat down at the table. While devouring his meal, he told her that he planned to visit the village chief's house later that evening. His goal was to arrange for their home to finally be connected to the electrical grid in the coming days. Upon hearing this, Lin Qingshui's hand trembled slightly, and she couldn't help but speak up. She reminded him that electricity meant having to pay a monthly bill forever, an expense they could ill afford. After saying this, she stole a quick, secretive glance at him to gauge his reaction. She was clearly afraid of provoking him, fearing he might lose his temper and slam his fist on the table. He noticed the look of worry on Lin Qingshui's face and decided to set his chopsticks down. He walked over to the door and brought the heavy basket inside the house for her to see. He explained that this was what he had dug up today and that he would sell it in the city soon. It should fetch a handsome price, which, to be honest, they desperately needed, as Lin Qingshui stared at the plant. She looked up at him quickly, asking in a tone of pure disbelief if he had truly dug it up himself. Seeing her doubt, he continued to explain, swearing to her that he hadn't stolen it from anyone. He insisted that this was the genuine result of an entire day of hard labor up on the mountain. Lin Qingshui looked at his sincere face and gave a suspicious nod, though she wasn't entirely convinced. She then mentioned that their sister-in-law had visited during the day, asking to borrow 5 pounds of pork. Looking at Lin Qingshui's face, it was quite evident that the encounter had left her deeply upset. He assumed it was his sister-in-law who had angered her while he was away, which was hardly surprising. And so, with a very serious expression, he began to speak. He looked at her and told her firmly that, from now on, she was the one in charge of their home. The money and their belongings belonged to her, and if she didn't want to lend anything, they simply wouldn't. Upon hearing these words, Lin Qingshui felt a wave of confusion wash over her. She reflected for a long time before finally admitting timidly that she really didn't want to lend the meat. She explained that her sister-in-law always said she was borrowing, but she never had any intention of returning it. It wasn't the first time she had taken things from their house only to let them vanish forever. As he listened to Lin Qingshui, a smile of genuine affection appeared on his face. He reached out to playfully pinch her nose, reassuring her that if she didn't want to lend it, they wouldn't. They weren't going to tolerate her sister-in-law's temper anymore, and wasn't her smile worth more than that, anyway? He left Lin Qingshui there, picked up his daughter, and walked toward the inner room. A little later, after finishing his own meal, he washed the dishes and cut a small portion of meat. He headed out into the darkness, where the village chief, Wan Fuchi, was quite surprised to see him. The chief's face lit up at the sight of the meat, and he asked what brought him there so late. He asked what was on his mind while, naturally, reaching out to take the meat from his hand. He explained that he wanted to install electric lighting at home and asked if the chief could help. The chief quickly agreed, promising that he would get everything organized for him by the very next day. Hearing this, he didn't say much more. He simply stood up and made his way back home. But upon entering the kitchen, we see Lin Qingshui in the dark, gnawing on the leftover bones he had discarded. The sight stung his eyes and made his blood run cold, and he finally managed to speak in a hoarse voice. He asked her what she was doing, a question that startled Lin Qingshui the moment she heard it. The bone she was holding fell to the floor, and she looked up at him with pure terror in the middle of the courtyard. She begged him not to hit her, explaining they were only his leftovers, and she simply felt it was a waste to throw them away. In that moment, he felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. Overcome with a frustration he'd never known, he suddenly dropped to his knees before her. Lin Qingshui let out a cry of fear, frantically asking what he was trying to do. She looked down at the man kneeling at her feet until she felt her own chest grow warm and damp. She was actually crying. His heart, which had been closed off for so long, seemed to soften as he watched his wife reduced to eating his scraps. Seeing her so frightened was like a knife twisting in his chest, a feeling he likely deserved, to be honest. He stood up, took his wife's pale face in his hands, and leaned down to gently kiss the tears from her eyes. He told her to go wait in the main hall, promising that as soon as the food was ready, he would bring it to her. He called her his great benefactor, a phrase Lin Qingshui didn't understand as she ran from the kitchen, embarrassed and startled. Back in the kitchen, we see him keeping himself busy for a while. Soon, a fragrant plate of stir-fried meat was ready and served from the pot. She had always felt that the coarse grains they usually ate were difficult to swallow. Her fingers were often covered in the thick dust of that mixed grain. And yet, even now, his wife was hesitant to take even a single bite to satisfy her hunger. But as he entered the inner room, a beautiful, pale back appeared before his eyes. In an instant, he felt a rush of heat and blood that he couldn't quite ignore. Casting everything else aside, he moved forward and pulled her into an embrace from behind. He whispered for her never to leave him again, and in her days, Lin Qingshui felt for the first time what this intimacy could be. It was something truly comfortable and pleasant, the first time since their honeymoon that the two of them had slept so closely together. Thinking back to the scene from the night before, Lin Qingshui felt a sudden, burning heat rush to her cheeks. But as she turned her head and looked toward the little girl in the small bed, Lin Qingshui instantly turned pale with fear, her heart sinking into her chest. It seemed she hadn't heard her daughter cry once throughout the entire night. And here we see that her husband had changed quite suddenly as well. With his eyes fixed on his daughter, he jumped out of bed and rushed toward the little girl's crib. He saw that his daughter was already awake, smiling at him with those big, bright eyes. His heart softened completely, and with the utmost care, he took the child into his arms. Seeing that her daughter was safe and still smiling, the heavy weight in Lin Qingshui's heart finally lifted, and her frayed nerves began to relax. Immediately, her eyes grew red and she nearly burst into tears, full of regret for having slept so deeply the night before. She told herself that with a child so small, anything could have gone wrong while she slept. He gently told his wife to stay in bed with Nyo for a while longer. He promised to go prepare breakfast, explaining that he was the reason she hadn't heard the baby cry. It turned out this man had actually gotten up early, the very first time he had cared for his daughter since her birth. She wondered if he had truly changed, and if she could dare to trust him once again. Meanwhile, we returned to the kitchen, where he was already busy working with surprising skill. By the time his wife emerged with the baby, the meal was ready: tofu, green vegetables, cornmeal porridge, and mixed grain buns. Still shirtless, he reached out and took the little girl from Lin Qingshui's arms. He told her to go wash up first, and though she was worried watching him clumsily hold such a tiny child, she couldn't help but burst out laughing, reminding him that his daughter was a baby, not a tiger. What could she possibly do to you? During breakfast, the village chief, Wang Xuanju, arrived along with the electrician. As they entered the courtyard, they saw Lin Qingshui sitting at the outdoor table, finishing her meal. Meanwhile, Zhengguo was pacing around the yard shirtless, cradling the little girl in his arms. Lin Qingshui noticed a neat row of tooth marks on the inside of his arm and couldn't help but smile knowingly. He asked Zhengguo if he hadn't finished eating yet, clearly not expecting Wang Xuanju to find someone so early in the day. And it seems he had indeed been busy, bringing both the village chief and the electrician along with him. The men gathered near the courtyard gate to exchange a few words and chat for a moment. Once Lin Qingshui finished her breakfast and headed back inside, he handed the baby over to his wife. Immediately after, he pulled a pack of Daishiman cigarettes from the pocket of his loose-fitting shorts. The village chief looked down at the pack of Daishiman, now resting in his hand. Grinning with a mouth full of yellow teeth, he remarked that the young rascal had finally found some success. After all, a pack like that costs 4 mao, a bit of a luxury in their circles. The electrician standing beside them smiled even more foolishly as he tucked his cigarette behind his ear. Shouldering his ladder, he made his way around to the back of the house to begin the work. To him, this trip was well worth the effort, as he wouldn't normally indulge in 4 mao cigarettes. This family was proving to be quite generous, and once the electricity was finally connected, Zhengguo headed back inside. But just as he stepped through the door, a piece of clothing came flying directly at his face. Before he could even process what was happening, he heard Lin Qingshui's voice calling out to him. She told him to hurry up and get dressed, asking him what he thought he looked like walking around bare-chested. At that moment, we see there were still a few visible scratches lingering across his back. Those marks, as it turns out, were exactly what Lin Qingshui had left behind the night before. The village chief and the electrician had certainly noticed them, but they were polite enough to say nothing. He, however, had no idea and continued walking around bare-chested as if it were the most natural thing in the world. This left Lin Qingshui feeling deeply embarrassed, wishing she could find a place to hide away from their gaze. With strangers present, she didn't dare say a word to him about it. It wasn't until he finally left that Lin Qingshui, her cheeks still burning, took a long moment to calm herself down. After that, she began the task of stripping the sheets from the bed to wash them. She carried the baby's cradle out into the courtyard and settled the little one there. Then, she filled a large basin with water to begin scrubbing the linens. Meanwhile, Lin's mother entered the kitchen with a basket in hand, looking her daughter over from head to toe. As she observed the old, ill-fitting clothes her daughter wore, she felt her eyes begin to well up with tears. She quickly looked away and began to distract her granddaughter in the cradle, noting how busy the house had been lately. "I came to see you," she said, her eyes wandering over the 3 old houses made of adobe and straw. Deep down, she constantly regretted ever consenting to this marriage in the first place. She felt she had ruined her daughter's life, and so she said, "Lin Qingshui, my child, I've been thinking. If you truly cannot go on living with him, then you should get a divorce." She reminded her that she was still young with a whole life ahead, and shouldn't let that despicable man ruin it. Lin Qingshui was left utterly stunned upon hearing her mother's sudden words. She sat on her stool for a long time, unable to find anything to say in response. We return to that day when he stole the money she had borrowed from her family just to buy rice porridge for the baby. She had felt truly desperate, convinced that staying by his side meant there was no hope left for her future. At one point, the dark thought of ending it all had even crossed her mind. In that moment of despair, she had wanted to take her daughter in her arms and jump into the reservoir. But after a day of profound sadness, once his drunkenness finally wore off, he had repented and slapped his own face 10 times. Immediately after that, he had rushed out to buy rice porridge for the little girl. And over the last few days, it really did seem as though he had changed for the better. He no longer went out seeking trouble, and he had stopped both the drinking and the gambling. Lin's mother watched her daughter, who simply lowered her head and remained silent. Assuming she was worried about the baby, the mother added that she could take the child with her. She promised to help her in the future, though she hesitated for a moment before continuing. She admitted that staying home with a child would make it quite difficult to find a new husband. In these times, after all, divorce is a very rare thing to see. No matter how hard life gets, a woman is often expected to just grit her teeth and keep moving forward. Upon hearing that her mother had already considered the prospect of her remarrying after a divorce, Lin Qingxue gently took the baby back from her mother's arms. She told her mother that, for the time being, she wasn't thinking about a divorce at all. It seemed to her that, little by little, he was actually starting to change for the better. As she spoke, she reached out and tugged at the new little dress the baby was wearing. She explained that he was the one who had earned the money to buy these clothes for the child. He had even bought an outfit for her as well, though she hadn't yet dared to put it on. Lin's mother looked at her daughter, noticing a soft, tender blush on her pale face that hadn't been seen in a very long time. Even her eyes seemed to have regained a certain sparkle, as if a bit of life had finally returned to them. The older woman couldn't help but feel stunned, especially since she had overheard something troubling just yesterday. She had heard the neighbor, Hermatzi, mentioning that the husband owed 50 yuan to a complete stranger. With such a massive debt hanging over them, and with her daughter having no way to earn, how could they possibly pay it back? It was precisely because of this worry that she had come so early in the morning, bringing supplies to check on her. But looking at her daughter's expression now, it didn't seem like she was pretending. The hope in her eyes was real. She told herself that if he truly repented for his mistakes, she would somehow find a way to get the money together. She was even willing to sell her own kitchen utensils if it meant helping her daughter clear that crushing debt. Thinking it over, she decided not to mention what she had heard, keeping the secret to herself for now. She feared it would only spark another fight, so she cleared her mind and nodded with satisfaction, her eyes reddening with emotion. If he can truly change, then I can finally be at peace, she said, wiping away the tears beginning to pool in her eyes. In that moment, the mother felt a rare sense of calm, though deep down, a lingering unease still tugged at her heart. It was a heavy, thick feeling of uncertainty that seemed to follow her everywhere, no matter how much she tried to shake it. We see that everything was being prepared just in time for the market season, as the family struggled to find their footing. Imagine the scene, a day meant for new beginnings, where emotions run high and every small change in the house feels like a victory. They were aligning their hopes with the meager resources they had, praying that welcome news would finally arrive at their door. It was a difficult language of survival they were learning to speak. We return to the cramped quarters where the family lives. Upon entering, one feels as though they can't even stand up straight. The interior is thick with dust, and cobwebs cling to every corner, telling the story of a home long neglected. To be perfectly honest, it really isn't a fit place for people to live. At this very moment, your little brother has no idea that your mother-in-law is arguing with your wife about whether to divorce or not. If you were to find out, you probably wouldn't feel much like climbing the mountain to dig up dendrobium in the coming days. After all, having been reborn, making money has become a top priority for you. And yet, nothing is more important to him than his wife and children. He knows the ways to make money from his previous life, so, naturally, he is in no particular hurry. Seeing that it would soon be noon, Lin's mother hurried back home, without even stopping to eat. She was afraid that if she ate even a single bite, her daughter would have one bite less for herself. Lin couldn't stop her, so she took down the meat hanging in the kitchen, cut off a generous piece, and ran out after her. She had no choice but to take that meat, slice a large portion in one stroke, and chase her down, calling out for her mother. This isn't fair, she thought. She wanted them to take it so her brother and sister-in-law could have a proper meal. Lin's mother saw such a large piece of meat and shook her head repeatedly, refusing to take it. She feared that if he knew she was helping her own family so much, he might hit her daughter again, or worse, that her daughter would go hungry. They had already suffered so many grievances, she insisted they keep it for themselves. We don't lack for that at home, she claimed, noting how thin her daughter was and worrying about how she would nurse the baby. In the end, Lin's mother simply refused to accept that piece of meat. She slung the basket over her arm and walked away, step by step, into the distance. Lin remained standing there at the doorway, watching her go. She watched as her mother grew smaller and smaller until she vanished from sight, before finally taking the meat back into the kitchen. We meet Zon Gillen, the neighbor, who is nearly the same age as Lin but happened to marry 2 years earlier. She has dark skin and, at this moment, we see her leaning against the wall, gnawing on a raw radish. "Sister, you haven't left the house all day," she remarks. "Word has already spread that your second brother beat your second sister-in-law last night." The screams were so loud, in fact, that they were heard in several neighboring houses. Lin Kingsway, emerging from the kitchen, sits on a stool in the patio and responds without much energy. Seeing her lack of enthusiasm, Zon Gillen drags over a stool and sits by the wash basin, lowering her voice to a whisper. She shares the rumor that your second brother's eldest son isn't actually his. When Lin Kingsway hears this, her hands stop their work immediately as she looks up at Zon Gillen in shock. He's actually your eldest brother's child, Zahn says, noticing the utter confusion in Lin's eyes. She stuffs the rest of the radish into her mouth and murmurs the gossip directly into Lin's ear. Lin remains seated on her stool, barely able to respond, while Zahn Gillen leaves her standing there stunned by the revelation. To be perfectly honest, she simply couldn't believe such a thing could be true. After all, she had always held this eldest brother in the highest regard. She had always thought him loyal and honest, a man who acted with justice, as an elder brother should. But after hearing this, her heart was filled with a sudden, heavy doubt. How could he have done such a thing? Zahn Gillen, meanwhile, seems quite satisfied with the reaction she provoked. She pats the young city bride and says she must head home to cook for her husband, ending their chat. That night, you return home very late, and seeing the lights on from a distance, you can't help but sigh. This electric bulb is certainly much brighter than any old sheep oil lamp, isn't it? Lin Kingsway sees you return and quickly begins taking the warm dishes out of the pot for you. She serves some white steamed buns and asks casually why you've returned so late today. Noticing the mud on your clothes, she sets the dishes down and begins to brush it off. You quickly try to hide it, turning to close the main door before pulling something from the grass pile in the corner and placing it carefully on the table. We see that you've dug up some dendrobium. It seems that on your way back, you had a little stroke of luck. Of course, you don't tell your wife that you actually slipped and fell before stumbling upon this find. It was a difficult climb back up, which explains why you've returned at such an hour. The price for this nowadays is certainly no lower than that of the dendrobium itself. These are all sold in secret, making it a nice little unexpected fortune for the family. Deep down, you're planning to enjoy a quiet, intimate night with your wife. Tomorrow, you won't be heading to the mountains. Instead, you'll go to sell the goods you have in hand. Lin Kingsway looks closely at the piece you've placed on the table. It is dark brown in color, with a shape that looks a bit like a piece of ginger. She seems to remember seeing this in a book and asks with uncertainty if it's a house guardian stone. There is a hint of disbelief in your tone, as you hadn't expected your wife to be so knowledgeable. To be honest, most people in the village wouldn't even recognize such a thing. They still have no idea how valuable it is. Otherwise, the mountain would have been picked clean long ago. Dendrobium and house guardian stones are rare finds, but they could become even scarcer. Sometime later, when planting technology advances, all of these will be grown artificially. They will eventually become common in the market and lose their status as rare treasures. But even then, the price for wild and rare medicinal herbs remains outrageously high. Because, as we know, wild herbs simply cannot be bought just anywhere. He flashed a wide, bright smile, pulling his delicate wife into an embrace and kissing her tender face. Looking into her shining eyes, he confirmed that it was, indeed, a house guardian stone. He told her that tomorrow, he would take her and their child for a trip to the city and her family home. He planned to sell these treasures at the pharmacy, but at the mention of taking the child out, Lin Kingsway's body suddenly went stiff. She remembered his previous threats that he was going to sell their daughter to a childless family in the city. Even now, she is terrified, wondering if such people truly want a child or if they are looking for a servant bride. She pulled away from his arms, her rejection filled with caution and a sudden, sharp vigilance. She insisted the girl was still too small and that the two of them would not be going anywhere. She told him to hurry up and wash his hands so they could finally eat. He watched her, noticing how strangely his wife was acting. He had only wanted to take her out for a stroll and perhaps buy her some new winter clothes. But seeing her on high alert again, it was obvious she feared he still harbored dark intentions toward their daughter. After the shameful things he had done in the past, it wouldn't be easy for her to let go of that pain in her heart. Their trust had already been completely exhausted. Rebuilding it could only happen one small step at a time. He took off his mud-stained shirt, opened the door, and stepped outside to wash his face. When he returned to the room and sat down, he finally took a good look at the food on the table. There was a plate of scrambled eggs and a small portion of sautéed meat left over from breakfast. He wondered if she had eaten any vegetables at noon, worried that she was still trying too hard to save money. He realized he needed to earn more money quickly, if only to make her feel truly at peace again. "Wife, where did you get these eggs?" he asked, curious about the sudden addition to their meal. Lin Kingsway lowered her head, quietly serving him a bowl of cornmeal soup. She explained that since he hadn't left the house in a long time, her mother had visited once and brought them. He wondered if his mother-in-law had mentioned a divorce, but Lin didn't say a single word about it. The moment he heard his mother-in-law had visited, he remembered how, in the past, he would have immediately asked her for drinking money. He felt so ashamed that he couldn't even look his wife in the eye, nor did he dare ask why her mother had really come. He began planning in his head, hoping that once he sold his current items, the first thing he'd do is repay the money he had taken from her. He reached out his hand, gently pulling his wife closer to make her sit down and join him. "Eat quickly," he said softly, handing her a steamed bun made of mixed flour. It seems his wife still didn't feel comfortable enough to steam buns using only expensive white flour. Instead, she had prepared these mixed buns, using only half white flour to save where she could. He, meanwhile, took a simple cornmeal bun for himself and began to eat. Lin Kingsway took a small, hesitant bite of her mixed flour bun. She looked up, secretly watching the man sitting across from her with a mix of hope and doubt. Deep down, she thought that if he could only stay like this forever, life would be so wonderful. She simply didn't know how much longer her weary body could endure this cycle of uncertainty. The two were eating in relative peace when, suddenly, a loud knock echoed from the door outside. "Fourth brother, it's me, Early Uzi," a voice called out from the yard. "Come on out, you're the only one missing. The brothers are all waiting for you to drink and play cards." Lin Kingsway's face turned pale the moment she heard that voice, her eyes freezing in a stare of pure dread. She was terrified that he would go out with them again to drink and gamble, just like before. The moment he heard that voice, he stood there stunned, immediately remembering exactly who it was. He set down his chopsticks, looked up, and saw the deathly pale face of his wife. He quickly stood up and pulled her into an embrace, asking her what was wrong. He asked if she felt unwell, his voice thick with genuine worry and tension. As she was held, Lin Kingsway gripped his shirt tightly with her thin, pale fingers. Her lips trembled slightly as she asked if he was going to drink and play cards with them again. He heard her words, and they sounded terribly weak, almost fragile. To be perfectly honest, since the day she married him, she hadn't known a single good day. Even the simple luxury of a full meal had become something of a distant dream for her. And yet, despite everything, she still held on to a flicker of hope for a stable life together. He took a deep breath, fighting back the stinging burn in his eyes. He used a low, husky voice to try and reassure her as best he could. He told her not to worry, that he wasn't going, and that he would send them away immediately. Lin Kingsway, still leaning into his arms, processed his words in silence. She lifted her face, her eyes damp with tears, and looked at him with a silent question. She asked if he was truly staying, and he looked down into her insecure, timid eyes. In that moment, he truly wished he could show her his heart, so she could see his sincerity. He gently rubbed her nose and promised her, his breath warm and steady, that he had changed. He assured her once more that he wasn't going anywhere and would make them leave at once. Then, we see him gently guide his wife back into her chair. He told her to keep eating and promised he would be back in just a moment. As he tried to stand, he found his shirt was still held in his wife's tight, desperate grip. If he didn't already know that the three men waiting outside were bad news, he might have actually taken her with him, just so she could watch him turn them away. Instead, he lowered his head and gave her a soft kiss on the crown of her head as a comfort. His hand, large and rough yet warm, gently patted her thin back to reassure her. Only then did she slowly, hesitantly, loosen her hold on him. He stood up straight and walked out, moving quickly on his toes toward the yard. He reached the courtyard entrance and pulled open the heavy wooden door. The men at the gate watched him emerge, led by a man named Earlias who wore a mocking smile. Spouting obscenities, he complained that it wasn't fair for his fourth brother to be hiding away like this. He joked that since his sister-in-law left the hospital, he hadn't been able to get out of bed. It had been several days, and he hadn't even bothered to look for his brothers to go drinking. Upon hearing those filthy words, a look of pure ferocity flashed across his face. He shouted with all his might, warning the man to be very careful with his words from now on. He told him quite clearly that if he didn't know how to speak properly, he should just shut his mouth. The other two men had been laughing along quite happily until that very second. But seeing the dark look on his face, they immediately realized something was very wrong. The smiles vanished instantly, and the two of them quickly tried to step in and calm the situation. "Fourth brother, come on. He just has a bit of a sharp tongue, that's all. Don't worry about him. Let's go grab a drink, brothers." As he spoke, he reached out his hand to rest it familiarly on the man's shoulder. But he simply raised his hand and brushed the extended arm away with cold indifference. He glanced sideways at the other two, making it clear that if this was about drinking or cards, they shouldn't come looking for him anymore, as he had decided to leave that life behind. The three of them stared at him, looking very much as if they had just seen a ghost. They traded looks of utter disbelief, completely stunned by this sudden change in attitude. However, Earlias wasn't the type to take a hint, and he kept that lecherous smile plastered on his face. With a complete lack of self-preservation, he continued to push his luck with another joke. He suggested that since his sister-in-law was out of recovery, the fourth brother was simply exhausted from her demands. He even dared to suggest the brothers should have a turn, but before he could finish, a boot met his chest. The kick sent him flying backward, leaving him flat on the ground and groaning in pain. He stepped forward with heavy strides, planting his foot firmly on the man's crotch as he leaned in. And there, we see him stare directly into the eyes of the scoundrel trembling on the floor. He warned him that if he ever spoke such nonsense again, his dark eyes flashing with a terrifying hardness, that the next time he dared to let such filth come out of his mouth, he would sew both his lips shut and then proceed to break his third leg for good measure. In that moment, the idle boaster found himself pinned to the dirt, his bravado completely vanished. Ignoring the ache in his chest, he desperately gripped the large foot held between his legs with both hands. He began screaming at the top of his lungs, begging the fourth brother and promising never to speak such nonsense again. The other two standing nearby were so shaken by the scene that they couldn't utter a single word for a long time. Radiating a dark, menacing energy, he looked truly terrifying in the night, and no one dared to step forward to mediate. To be honest, they had been afraid of this man since they were all children. He had always been a ruthless character, the kind of person who placed no value on his own life when he fought. But today was the first time they saw him simply staring with wide eyes, like a hungry tiger ready to devour its prey. Feeling a chill run down their spines, they begged him to forgive Elias and just take his wife back home properly. Deep down, he didn't want his wife to see this violent side of him, fearing it might frighten her. He told himself that if he scared her again over such a trivial matter, then everything would truly be over for him. He straightened up and looked down at Elias on the ground with a cold, dominant gaze. As he finally withdrew his foot, the other two felt as though they had just been granted a divine pardon. They quickly helped Elias up and called out to the fourth brother as they prepared to retreat. Once the three of them had vanished into the night, he let go of all that pent-up aggression. He stepped back into the courtyard and carefully slid the bolt shut behind him. Inside the house, Linkinsu had been restless since the moment he left, feeling as if she were sitting on pins and needles. Every passing minute and every ticking second felt excruciatingly difficult for her. Seeing that he hadn't returned for so long, her heart had nearly grown cold, despite her stomach growling with hunger. But even looking at the warm food waiting on the table, she found she couldn't swallow a single bite. In just these few days, watching him improve little by little, her heart had unknowingly filled with hope once more. She didn't expect a life of wealth or prosperity. She only hoped they could live a quiet, stable life together. But she couldn't help but wonder, what if he returns to his old ways of drinking and gambling? Their child was still so small that the thought of raising him alone felt like an impossible burden. She questioned if divorce was her only path, but just then, the steady sound of footsteps reached her ears. Her eyes instinctively turned toward the door, searching for the source of the sound in the darkness. And there we see his tall figure, stepping out of the moonlight and back into the house. In that moment, the light returned to Linkinsu's dull eyes, and they suddenly began to shine with relief. It seemed he hadn't gone out to waste his time with those scoundrels after all. A pleasant surprise, really. She remained in a daze as he approached her, his presence filling the small room once again. Late into the night, he felt a sudden urge to pull her into a warm, protective embrace. He leaned down and gently kissed his wife's soft cheek, a rare gesture of genuine affection. He teased her softly, asking if she had already forgotten her own husband after he'd only been gone a short while. He handed her the chopsticks, took his seat at the table, and picked up a simple cornmeal bun. As he began to eat hungrily, Linkinsu watched him, still unable to fully process the change in his behavior. She asked him, almost in a whisper, if he truly intended to stop wasting his life with those men. He gave her his word right then and there, declaring that he had broken ties with them for good. He promised never to gamble with them again, and Linkinsu, nodding slowly, finally began to eat her meal. As she ate, she found herself stealing glances at her husband every few moments. He was eating quite quickly, yet there was a certain rugged charm to his handsome, angular face. To be honest, it actually made him rather pleasant to look at, despite the tension of the evening. After all, she had married him not just because he saved her life, but because he was a decent-looking man. Back then, she had been blinded by his looks, and she'd essentially traded her marriage to help her younger brother. That was the real reason she married him, even though he was poor and had absolutely nothing to his name. Seeing his wife staring at him in a daze, he placed a golden egg onto her bun, unaware of what was crossing her mind. He teased her with a smile, telling her to eat up, promising she could stare at him all she wanted once they were in bed. His nonsense brought Linkinsu back to reality, and she gave him a look of pure disdain after seeing his shameless behavior. She lowered her head, her face flushing a deep red, and quietly began to eat. Once he was full, he didn't seem to be in any particular hurry to leave her side. He curled up on the bench beside her, staring intently at his wife. The more he looked at her, the more he adored her. We have to remember that in this era, resources were scarce, the food was poor, and cosmetics were practically non-existent. And yet, her skin remained soft and rosy, leaving the man completely mesmerized by her natural beauty. She looked more beautiful than modern stars with their injections. Noticing her knuckles were red from work, he gently took her thin wrist. He pulled her close, thinking of the laundry hanging outside, and began planning to sell goods at the market the next day. His goal was to obtain a voucher for a washing machine from the board chairman. In these times, many people didn't even know what a washing machine was, let alone dream of spending money to buy one. But he told himself that with a machine, his wife would never have to wash clothes by hand again. Lin Qingshui shyly pulled her hand away, feeling utterly embarrassed by the way he was watching her. She told him that if he was finished, he should go heat up some water and wash himself. He stood up and gave his wife a quick kiss on the cheek before heading to the kitchen to start the water. Once he had gone, Lin Qingshui set down her chopsticks and touched her burning cheeks. It seemed this man had developed a habit of holding her and kissing her constantly since the night before. Every time he drew near, she could practically smell his pheromones, making her heart race as if it had a mind of its own. His aunt was acting quite wild, and the four children simply couldn't understand what was happening around them. After the meal, we see him take Lin Qingshui by the hand, telling her he's taking her for a walk to help her relax. On the way back, however, he didn't head home, but instead led Lin Qingshui in a completely different direction. They arrived at a dilapidated mud hut, which had nothing but a makeshift shed standing outside. Inside the house, a woman was clutching her chest, gasping for breath without a moment's rest. She took a handful of corn grits, mixed them with water, and placed them into a chipped ceramic jar. Just from those few steps, her face turned pale, and the world seemed to spin before her eyes once more. The woman leaned against the house, her skin white as a sheet while large beads of sweat rolled down her forehead. She was deeply worried, but then, a man with salt and pepper hair approached with long strides from the distance. She frowned as she watched him, and he quickly took the water ladle from her hand. He told her to go back inside the house to rest, insisting that he would handle the cooking himself. As the woman looked at him, the man handed her half a loaf of bread he had managed to get in exchange for his work. He mentioned he'd been lucky enough to get bread that day, claiming he'd eaten half and brought the rest for her. He urged her to eat it quickly, believing that some food would help her recover much faster. When she asked if he had already eaten, the man simply replied that he had no appetite at the moment. He added a handful of rice to the jar, knelt down to start the fire, and repeated that he had already eaten. The woman thought of his health, which was just as fragile as hers, and held the bread out to him again. She insisted she wasn't hungry, telling him to eat it all since she only wanted something light after lying down all day. The man silently tended to the fire, telling her quite firmly to just eat because he told her to. "How are you going to recover if you don't eat?" the man asked, lowering his head as his eyes filled with tears. Deep down, the same question haunted them both. If they ate everything today, what would they have for tomorrow? She didn't seem to care about her own body at all, focusing all her worry on that tiny, precious bit of rice. Even so, he had to practically beg several villagers just to find enough to buy it. It pained him to see her busy all day without eating, and it hurt him even more that she had to suffer alongside him in the fields. She gently took his hand, telling him not to think so much, and to simply rest and take care of himself. She promised that tomorrow she would go look for medicine, certain that he would eventually get better. We see that Lin Qingshui felt a heavy weight in her heart witnessing this, and on the way back, she asked about the couple's situation. He remained silent for a moment, wondering exactly how he should explain it to her. He told her he didn't know the man personally, but in truth, he recognized him from the television in his previous life. That old man had been a titan who dominated the business world for many, many years. After his death, he had donated his entire fortune to establish a medical charity foundation in the name of his beloved. His greatest lifelong regret was failing to protect his wife, having to watch her die while tormented by a relentless illness. Based on his memories and a bit of guesswork, he suspected that this very moment was the beginning of that fatal sickness. However, he estimated that her condition was mostly due to malnutrition, living in a leaky shack and eating nothing but watery soup. In such conditions, even a minor ailment can easily turn into a life-threatening disease. He planned to have his wife give her some Baiyao medicine, while also providing the money to invest in this future tycoon. It was a solid plan, at least for the time remaining before the college entrance exams were finally reinstated. He would have a tutor, after all. The following morning, well before the sun had even begun to rise, he opened his eyes, quietly slipped out of bed, and walked over to the small bed nearby. With great care, he took his daughter in his arms and placed her gently beside his wife, covering her snugly with the blanket. After preparing breakfast for his wife, he quietly closed the door behind him and stepped out. His wife remained fast asleep as he opened the outer door and stepped into the street, facing a biting, heavy wind. Even though it was still quite early, there were already many pedestrians out and about on the road. In those years, if a rural family managed to own a large 28-inch steel bicycle, well, that was considered a sign of being in a rather enviable position. And so, most people still had to rely on their own 2 feet to get anywhere. Guided by the memories of his previous life, he found the largest Chinese medicine shop in the area without a moment's delay. The square-faced, middle-aged man behind the counter looked him up and down when he saw what he had brought in. He then took the fresh, damp herbs and began to examine them with a practiced eye. Upon seeing the quality of these particular specimens, he realized they were high-quality forest herbs, each one perfectly intact, which surprised him more than a little. He carefully placed the herbs on the counter and tentatively asked what price he was looking to get for them. Hearing the man ask him to set the price, he didn't bother being modest and directly named a figure. He knew perfectly well, of course, that the other man would try to haggle. And indeed, the pharmacy manager realized he wasn't dealing with someone easily fooled the moment he heard the offer. He took a quick glance at the man's humble clothes and invited him into the back workyard. Once in the backyard, the two of them stood there together, haggling for nearly an hour until, finally, he sold 2 large plants, each about the size of a hand. He also sold him the cuscuta, feeling quite satisfied with the day's price as he tucked 50 large bills into his pocket. We see him stepping out of the pharmacy, and now that he finally has some money in his pocket, he heads straight for the state-run department store. He had every intention of buying a washing machine, but he was left completely speechless after speaking with the salesman. He slapped his forehead in realization. Although washing machines exist, they are only used in hotels and laundries, having not yet reached private homes. The first domestically produced washing machine wouldn't even appear until 1978, after all. It simply hasn't been manufactured yet, but quite unexpectedly, he managed to get his hands on a coupon for a 9-inch black and white television. Without a second thought, he bought it, along with several coupons for oil and meat. He even picked up coupons for flour, and the local speculators quickly realized that a very important customer had just arrived. They became remarkably enthusiastic and helpful toward him. Upon learning that he intended to take the television home that very day, they even helped him find someone to assist with transport. He was introduced to an acquaintance with a tractor who, for just 2 yuan, agreed to haul all his new belongings back to the village. He accepted the offer immediately, and then, back at the state store, he bought his wife a beautiful, high-quality red sweater. He didn't stop there, picking out leather shoes and trousers for her, as well as gifts for his children. He chose several sets of small clothes that he knew the little ones would absolutely love. He also purchased several new quilts, buying essentially everything that came to mind. By the time he was finished, the tractor was nearly half full, leaving the driver in a state of total shock. The man stood there with his mouth hanging open, unable to believe his eyes. He was truly struggling to believe that a young man in such worn-out rags could afford to fill a tractor with so many goods. The driver simply couldn't believe that this young man, dressed in such old, tattered clothes, had actually hired a tractor. He stared in disbelief, unable to reconcile the man's humble appearance with the wealth of goods he was transporting. Meanwhile, back at the village, a woman explains that she isn't home and cannot make any decisions on her own. Wang Xuanzu smiled, the deep wrinkles on his face folding into a warm expression. They gathered together, and he waved a hand at Lin Qingshui, not really paying much attention to what was being said. He turned to say a few words to the educated young woman standing beside him before finally taking his leave. He remarked that if it hadn't been for the favor of that piece of meat her son sent, he never would have sent such a beautiful girl to their home. In this particular group of educated youths, when you add everyone up, there are more than 20 people, and for the most part, they are all young and strong. There is only one delicate girl among them, which is why he decided she should live in their house. He figured it was better for the young couple to have her there. Sending a girl seemed much wiser than sending a young man. After all, it's often more convenient for women to handle certain evening chores than it is for men. There was no reason to hide it, though he told her not to worry about a young, beautiful wife being envied by others. Li Tian, feeling somewhat abandoned, clutched her canvas bag and stared at the 3 dilapidated adobe houses. A chill ran through her heart as she realized her coming days would likely be harder than those of the other youths sent to the countryside. We see that the family assigned to Hongmei, by contrast, seems to be living quite comfortably. They are a middle-aged couple with 3 children, and all of them are dressed in remarkably elegant clothes. On the way there, she had overheard people saying that the family she was assigned to wasn't good at all. The rumors claimed the man drinks, gambles, and even raises his hand against his wife. To make matters worse, the family is supposedly so poor they have almost nothing left to eat. Before arriving, she told herself that the rumors were surely exaggerated, but now it seems they hadn't lied at all. The only thing is that the mistress of this house, despite being dressed in old, baggy clothes, is remarkably beautiful. Her features are delicate, almost as if she had stepped right out of a painting, which, in this setting, is quite a surprise. She doesn't look like a peasant woman at all, and Lin Qingshui quickly noticed that she was being examined very carefully. She lowered her head and looked at herself, dressed in old, patched-up clothes that had seen better days. Then she looked back at the young woman standing before her, who was wearing a modern dacron dress. She wore white socks with leather shoes, looking both elegant and beautiful. She pretended not to notice that inquisitive gaze and simply told her to take a seat for a moment. The room is a bit of a mess, to be honest, cluttered with all sorts of miscellaneous things. She explained that she would have to wait for her husband to return before he could take a photo of her. Lin Qingshui, however, felt like she simply couldn't wait. She had planned to eat just anything for lunch, but now that a new educated youth has arrived, things have changed. And so, she has no choice but to roll up her sleeves and start preparing a proper meal. Li Tian, realizing this will be her home for the foreseeable future, knows she must do her part. She can't just eat and live there for free, so she washed her hands and headed into the kitchen to help. "Sister-in-law, do you want me to start the fire?" she asked as she stepped into the room. But then she stopped, completely stunned. The old kitchen was perfectly clean and organized, and there, hanging from the beam, was a piece of meat so large it was hard to miss. It makes one wonder who exactly claimed this family was so poor they had nothing to eat. If this is what having nothing to eat looks like, eating meat in such a large portion, then the rumors were very wrong indeed. She nodded and stepped out of the kitchen, approaching the small bed where a child, as clean and fair as a doll, lay resting. He was quite a charming little thing, and she couldn't help but lean over to play with him for a moment. She found herself wondering how the mistress of the house, who seemed to be her own age, could look so radiant and beautiful. How could she have married so young? And more importantly, why would she settle for such a useless man? He was, after all, a local ruffian, which made her wonder if the poor woman had been forced into the marriage against her will. As these thoughts crossed her mind, Li Tian felt a sudden, cold shiver run down her spine. The more she turned the idea over in her head, the more frightened she became of her new surroundings. She even considered whether she should go to the village chief and beg him to move her somewhere else. In her mind, it would be perfectly fine even if the next house was a bit poorer than this one. Anything would be better, she told herself, as long as the man of the house was a decent person. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Lin Qingshui was busy with the cooking, completely unaware of her guest's distress. She had no idea that the young intellectual outside was busy composing such a dramatic tragedy in her own mind. Before long, a steaming bowl of hot noodles was ready and lifted from the pot. Lin Qingshui carried the dish out, the aroma filling the small room as she approached. She called out to her guest, inviting her to come and have a bowl of noodles before doing anything else. Li Tian snapped back to reality, her eyes fixed on the large bowl of rich, glistening noodles on the table. She stood there stunned for a second before quickly introducing herself as Li Tian. She told her that, from now on, she could simply call her Tian, a small gesture of friendship, perhaps. Lin Qingshui simply nodded in response, choosing to say nothing more for the time being. Later that afternoon, around 4 o'clock, a tractor came rumbling loudly into the village, making its way along the muddy path. The vehicle came to a halt right in front of the house, just as Lin Qingshui, who was busy husking corn in the yard, heard the sudden roar from outside. She quickly set aside the work she had in her hands to see what the commotion was about. Lin Qingshui stood up and walked toward the gate, arriving just in time to see him climbing down from the tractor. She couldn't help but wonder to herself why on earth he was returning home in such a noisy contraption. But before she could even ask what was going on, the tractor driver shouted at the top of his lungs, "Young man, are you sure you have enough room in your house for all of this?" With that, the driver walked around to the back of the vehicle, carefully moving a television set inch by inch to the edge. He was clearly terrified of damaging it, so the young man jumped up and took the television down himself. He simply smiled at the driver and remarked that their home would be much larger in the future, an optimistic thought, to be sure. Meanwhile, Lin Qingshui remained standing there by the side of the path. She was utterly stunned by the scene unfolding right before her eyes. In a complete daze, she managed to ask if he had really been the one to buy all of this. Her voice was thick with disbelief as she looked at the pile of goods, especially that television set. She wondered just how much money and how many ration coupons all of this must have cost them. He looked at his wife's beautiful, pale face and saw the shock written all over it. Seeing her so worried, he stepped closer and gently touched her cheek to reassure her. Deep down, he understood perfectly well that she was grieving the loss of their savings, but to him, this money was a small price to pay. He didn't care about the cost at all. His only desire was for his wife to finally share in his happiness and never suffer again. Leaning in close to Lin Qingshui's ear, he whispered that he would explain everything in detail later on. For now, he told her to just stand back and relax, making sure she didn't lift a finger. "First, I'm going to unload everything," he said, and Lin Qingshui listened closely to his words. She moved to the side, watching as the items were lowered from the vehicle and piled up like a small mountain. Deep down, she was starting to regret things. If she had known this would happen, she would have taken the child and followed him to the city. She couldn't help but wonder how much money this cost and why he didn't seem to know how to manage a household. The question remained, where on earth did he get all that money and those ration coupons? After all, who would even care for a television? The electricity alone would cost a fortune. What a waste, she thought. And at that very moment, we see Li Tian standing there in the corner. She stood clutching the baby in her arms, her eyes fixed on the tall young man with broad shoulders and long legs. To her, he was just the village rogue. She had originally imagined him to be someone ugly and vulgar. She never expected him to be a man with such deep features and a truly heroic appearance. In all her years, she had rarely ever seen a man quite so handsome. As she watched him, her heart began to beat uncontrollably, which, naturally, was quite unexpected. Li Tian finally understood why a woman as beautiful as a flower like Lin Qingshui would choose him. She wondered why they had married so young, noting that this man was more handsome than the stars in the movies. Once everything was unloaded, he pulled 2 yuan from his pocket and handed them to the tractor driver. The driver took the money, gave a quick wave, and drove off in his noisy tractor. And so, our protagonist began the task of carrying all the new belongings into the courtyard. His wife tried to help, but he wouldn't hear of it, telling her to simply sit down and rest. He hadn't even noticed yet that there was a strange woman standing there in his house. Meanwhile, Zhao Jingxin approached after hearing the rumors, standing stunned at the sight of so many things piled at his brother's door. He couldn't help but wonder where on earth a lazy rogue like him got the money to buy so many things. In that poor, miserable house of his, there was absolutely nothing left that could be sold for profit. A dark thought crossed his mind. Had he actually sold the children? He panicked at the very idea. Zhao Jingxin quickened his pace until he reached the door, where he finally saw his wife holding their little daughter. His heart finally settled. Without saying a word, Zhao Jingxin simply began helping carry the items into the courtyard. He stared at that heavy piece of iron, knowing that once turned on, images and sounds would magically pour out of it. A crowd of curious neighbors soon gathered in the courtyard, bustling around like a swarm of busy ants. It felt as lively as a movie premiere. Zhao Jingxin circled the television curiously, though he was far too shy to actually touch it. Eventually, Zhao Jingxin pulled him aside to the entrance of the courtyard and asked where all that money had come from. Our protagonist, not bothered in the least, simply patted his chest and gave his explanation. He claimed he had earned it all by hunting and selling his prey on the black market. He decided, however, not to tell his older brother anything about the valuable shio herbs he had found. It wasn't a lack of trust. It was simply that the shio grows on incredibly steep and dangerous cliffs. Even if he shared the secret, his older brother wouldn't be able to help much with such a perilous task. Besides, if the news leaked out, his own private source of income would surely vanish. He planned to wait for the spring thaw next year to take both his brothers to the mountain to find good harvesting spots. He would teach them the tricks of the trade, and after that, their success would depend entirely on their own luck. Zhao Jingxin opened his mouth to advise him to focus on farming the land instead. But looking at his younger brother, with eyes so bright and a newfound depth and cunning, he felt as if he were looking at a stranger. He seemed almost unrecognizable, and it struck him as quite strange to see his brother suddenly so grounded. But no, he couldn't simply accept that. It was far too much to process all at once. The sheer scale of the change was staggering, leaving him hanging in a state of utter disbelief. Our protagonist insisted, telling him that he would pay him a proper salary for his work. After all, even between close brothers, clear accounts are what keep a friendship healthy and strong. He then asked his older brother to please help him find a truly skilled master craftsman for the job. He also insisted on using high-quality materials, hoping to move into the new house before winter. Zhao Jingxin nodded, assuming he only meant to repair the 3 old huts. He never imagined his brother would have the audacity to build 2 stories. You entrusted him with this because you were simply too busy to manage it all. You were thinking that you had to harvest all the dendrobium before winter set in, knowing that such wild medicine could always be sold. If you happened upon a path and found deer antler or other rare items, it would be a massive windfall, seeing that it was still early. You wouldn't find Wang Xuanzu. In the era of a planned economy, building houses and buying bricks required official permits, and Wang Xuanzu, the village chief, held invincible power. You handed him a pack of Deqianmen cigarettes and a single yuan, smoothly securing the permit to purchase the bricks. With the permit in hand, you went straight to the commune's brick factory to place the order. Zhao Jingxin was left utterly perplexed. He wondered just how thick his brother planned to make the walls, given the massive amount of bricks he was ordering for a 2-story house. You joked it was for your future son's wedding. Zhao Jingxin's eyes widened in shock. He watched as his brother handled a large roll of cash like it was common paper, stuffing it casually into his pocket without any fear of losing it. Zhao Jingxin realized that his once shabby brother now possessed a truly commanding presence. Even standing next to the brick factory director, he looked imposing without even trying. If he wore a coat without patches, one might think he was the son of a high-ranking leader. If not for the mole on his neck and the old scar on his hand, Zhao Jingxin might have suspected a secret swap. Zhao Jingxin felt dizzy and confused. His brother had changed, and it felt incredibly strange. As you neared home, you pulled from your pocket 5 large bills and handed them over, asking him to handle the rest of the materials. Zhao Jingxin reached out to take the money, but feeling his hands were a bit dirty, he rubbed them on his clothes first. He then tucked the cash carefully into his inner pocket. Terrified of losing it through a simple oversight, Zhao Jingxin told him sincerely that he was moved by such trust, promising his brother an impeccable job. He nodded, thinking that if he couldn't trust his own brother, who could he trust? He remembered how his family had suffered in his past life. Perhaps his daughter wouldn't have even been born, consumed by his own past failures. In the Zhao family ancestral hall, Lin Qingshui was his recognized wife. He reflected on how much things had changed, feeling the weight of his responsibilities and the path he had chosen to take. With 5 girls in the house, life was a constant bustle, and he was determined to ensure that no more hardships would strike his family's shoulders. He wanted to erase the trauma of the past, knowing that true glory lay in providing for those who had once carried his burdens. When he returned with more small clothes for his daughter, Lin Qingshu, he wondered why he was spending money so unnecessarily again. After all, who buys brand new clothes to wear every single day? It seemed a bit much, even for him. The last time he had gone to town to buy her that jacket, she hadn't even worn it yet, saving it for a special occasion, no doubt. She didn't dare use the new things, but seeing how much he thought of his wife and daughter, her heart softened. Lin Qingshui remained deeply happy as she hugged the soft, thick cotton quilt, preparing to tuck it away safely in the trunk. In that moment, she couldn't stop the tears from falling. It was a rare moment of pure, overwhelming relief. This was even better than the new cotton quilt she had received on her wedding day. To be honest, there was no comparison. Everything was so much better now, yet she noticed he hadn't bought a single thing for himself. His own shirt was still covered in patches. His shoes were in even worse condition, worn down and broken from all his hard work. It was a sobering sight. Meanwhile, Li Tiantian helped hold the daughter, her eyes fixed anxiously on those stylish new clothes. She fidgeted restlessly, scratching her ears and cheeks like a hungry cat that had just spotted a prize fish. We see her eyeing that V-neck sweater, the height of fashion in the city at that time. She had wanted to buy it herself while shopping, but her parents had flatly refused to allow such an extravagance. Spending half a month's salary on a single sweater was, in their eyes, an absolute disaster. But here it was. Lin Qingshui hasn't yet realized that this new clothing isn't just any ordinary purchase, but seeing the very items she once desired appear right here changes everything. Li Tiantian can't help but feel a surge of envy. Lin Qingshui's husband is not only handsome, but clearly more than willing to spend money on his wife. He also knows how to be truly affectionate. While they were moving things, he wouldn't let her lift a finger, fearing she might overexert herself. He cherishes her and looks after her as if she were the absolute apple of his eye. How could the village spread rumors that such a good man was nothing more than a cold, hardened gambler? It was simply nonsense, as we see him stride in from outside with great purpose the moment he crosses the threshold. He noticed an unfamiliar young woman standing there holding the child, watching his wife with a faint smile. She is a friend, apparently, though after Li Tiantian noticed his gaze, she quickly lowered her eyelids. She didn't dare make eye contact, even though she considered herself a sophisticated city person who had always looked down on these country folk. Ever since this man returned on that dust-covered tractor, everything felt different. Even though she had been standing right there, his eyes and his heart were reserved solely for his young wife. A living, breathing person was standing in the room, yet he hadn't spared her a single glance from start to finish. Lin Qingshui, meanwhile, remained busy with the work at hand, lost in her own tasks. Upon hearing his question, she suddenly realized there was indeed another person in the house. The woman had been so quiet, and Lin Qingshui was so preoccupied with packing the new purchases that she had forgotten her entirely. Lin Qingshui quickly took the child from Li Tiantian's arms with an apologetic look and turned to explain the situation to him. She explained that this was a young intellectual sent to the countryside by the team leader. The girl had mentioned that she wanted to stay in their home temporarily. She asked him what he thought, suggesting they could perhaps clean out the west room to make a space for her to live. Her words carried a tone of consultation. Even though he said she was the boss of the house, she still didn't quite dare to make such a big decision alone. When he heard that a stranger was planning to move into their home, he couldn't help but frown slightly, almost instinctively. He didn't want anyone disturbing the quiet life he shared with his wife, but seeing the expectant look in her eyes, the words of rejection that were right on the tip of his tongue simply wouldn't come out. Deep down, he was terrified she might think he didn't care about her wishes. He said nothing at first, walking to the door, but then, following his wife's lead, he took off his jacket and reached into a secret pocket. He pulled out the remaining cash from the dendrobium sale and handed it directly to her. After that, he gently took their daughter from Lin Qingshui's arms. He made the little girl laugh and began telling her all about his grand plan to build a brand new house. Lin Qingshui took the money from his hand, staring at the crisp, large bills in utter silence. To be honest, it felt a bit unbelievable to her that after buying so many things, there was still this much money left. 2 dendrobium plants, a showu root, and that bit of deer antler. It seemed like a fortune. It was hard to grasp that things found by the roadside were worth so much, especially as he continued talking about building the house. Lin Qingshui quickly tucked the money away, carefully hiding it under his eager, watchful gaze. She then fell into a brief silence, realizing that if they didn't build, this money alone could sustain them comfortably for years. But if they actually went through with the construction, this wouldn't be enough, and they would likely end up buried in debt. Her own brother had helped them so much over the last 2 years, and now they finally had their own chance to build something new. She worried that taking such big steps might expose her husband's past faults or lead to more trouble. And yet, she found herself looking at the man standing before her, seeing a strength she hadn't noticed before. As they stood there in their humble home, the weight of the future felt heavy, yet strangely full of a new kind of hope. He simply stood there with a thick-skinned grin, watching Lin Qingshui. In his past life, he had seen it all, but this was what truly mattered. We see him lean in once more, gently kissing Lin Qingshui's full lips while admiring her tender, blushing face. In that moment, his heart simply melts. He teases her, wondering how she can still be so naive now that she's a mother, before returning to the plan. Tomorrow, her brother will bring the materials. He reminds her to give him any extra money he might need, and while Lin Qingshui nods silently, she can't shake a strange feeling about her brother and sister-in-law. Thinking of them makes her feel instantly uneasy, a change he notices immediately as he leans close to her cheek to ask what's wrong. He encourages her not to keep secrets, but after a moment's thought, she simply shakes her head. Seeing she isn't ready to talk, he doesn't insist. Meanwhile, Li Tiantian is standing in the main hall, having vaguely overheard Lin Qingshui reminding him that there are guests outside, her face turning red as a tomato. She steps into the center of the courtyard to breathe the fresh air and compose herself, suddenly reconsidering her plan to ask the team leader for a room change. The owner of this house doesn't seem nearly as deplorable as the villagers claimed, especially after she watched the young wife organizing their new belongings. She noticed most of the items were for the home, the child, or the wife. She saw almost nothing for the man himself, which gave her pause. While Li Tiantian stands lost in thought, the little girl in his arms has already fallen fast asleep, her face a picture of crystalline tranquility. He turns gently and lays the little princess on the bed, tucking her in with care before Lin Qingshui leads Li Tiantian toward her quarters. She explains that the guest will have to make do for now, as the West Room is still cluttered with things her husband hasn't finished organizing. Li Tiantian listens to Lin Qingshui and turns her head, but seeing the wife's flushed cheeks, she can't help but think of the conversation she overheard earlier. Her own face grows warm as she quickly insists it's no trouble at all, thanking them both for their hospitality. Lin Qingshui smiles and shakes her head, telling her it's quite alright as long as she doesn't mind that their family is poor. With that, she bends down to move her daughter's small wooden bed, but he quickly rushes over to help, telling her to be careful with her back. Lin Qingshui smiles and heads to the West Room, finding her husband already working with his shirt off, his muscles straining as he moves the heavy items. She repeatedly insists he put on a white t-shirt, though his defined arms remain exposed, radiating a strength that is hard to ignore. The shirt covers his broad back and its various scars. Not quite understanding why his wife is so insistent, he simply gathers the bamboo rakes to take outside. He had barely been working for a moment when he saw his wife entering with her sleeves rolled up, and he quickly moved to stop her. He tells her gently that she doesn't need to help there, as the room is far too dusty for her. He urges her to stay in the courtyard, feeling a wave of anxiety when he sees that Lin Qingshui isn't following his advice. We see him set down his tools and firmly, yet carefully, usher her back toward the door. Deep down, it pained him to see her in such a mess. How could he possibly let her help in a place so thick with dust? To be honest, if he weren't already planning to start construction on the house very soon, and knowing that a group of workmen would be constantly coming and going from the property, he likely wouldn't have agreed to let this young intellectual stay in their home at all. But, upon further reflection, he realizes that Li Tiantian staying with them actually has its advantages. It means he can head into the mountains to hunt and gather mushrooms without leaving his wife alone. She can talk with his wife and help ease her boredom while he is away working. Watching him practically push Lin Qingshui out of the room, Li Tiantian can't help but cover her mouth and giggle quietly. She teases her, saying that her husband truly adores her, a comment that makes Lin Qingshui's heart flutter. A deep blush spreads across Lin Qingshui's face as she offers a shy smile, though she finds no words to reply. She tells herself that this man really has changed, as long as she is at home. He refuses to let her lift a finger, even going so far as to bring hot water to the room for her to wash up every night. She truly feels as though she is being cherished with the utmost care, so much so that it feels a bit unreal. There is even a flicker of fear within her, as Lin Qingshui dreads the possibility of him suddenly reverting to his old ways. It keeps her heart in her throat every day, living with the constant, quiet fear of losing this newfound happiness. Her spirit remains in a state of high tension, desperately hoping that these good days will last just a little longer. And so, she remains incredibly careful in everything she says and does, as if any small mistake might break the spell. She is terrified of upsetting him. At lunchtime, we see her pass the white flour bun to him, while she contentedly nibbles on a coarse grain one. It is quite ironic, really, considering she is usually the one complaining that the coarse grain buns have no flavor. She was the one who asked him to make some white flour buns in the first place, but now that they are ready, she won't take a single bite, leaving them all for him. In truth, he doesn't much care what he eats himself. As long as she can live in peace and stops wandering off, he will be perfectly satisfied. Deep down, Lin Qingshui still doesn't understand how he has suddenly become such a good man. In the past, he would get drunk and act like a madman, only to wake up, hug her, and beg for forgiveness on his knees after every binge. He would restrain himself for a little while, but it only ever lasted 2 or 3 days before he reverted to his old ways. He would go right back to his carousing. She had never seen him like this, cooking and heating water for days on end. He even comforts the children now, and has gone as far as buying them proper clothes and shoes. Lin Qingshui knows this all too well. She constantly reminds herself that she must stay alert and not fall into this whirlwind of sweetness, fearing what might happen if she eventually wakes from this dream. If reality turns out to be different from this present moment, what will become of her then? But he, of course, has no idea about the complicated doubts swirling in his wife's heart. As we see the sky begin to darken, he has finally finished fixing up the West Room, which is part of the tiled house. It had always been cluttered with junk and left empty. The wallpaper was as rotten as a spiderweb, falling apart at the slightest touch. Even though it has been tidied up, a thick layer of dust still seems to linger everywhere. With quick, agile movements, he finishes the repairs and sets up a small wooden bed. Feeling he has fulfilled the task his wife set for him, he steps out with a sweat-soaked brow, and Lin Qingshui quickly hands him a towel. She tells him to hurry and clean up because dinner is almost ready, though he doesn't even reach out his hand. His tall, lean frame leans in slightly, bringing that handsome face of his much closer to hers. Standing before his wife, his warm breath brushing against her, he simply calls out to her, "Wife." He asks if she will help him clean up, and upon hearing his words, Lin Qingshui instinctively glances around. She looks toward Li Tiantian, who is just entering the house with her things, and once the girl is inside, a small smile plays on her lips. She raises her hand to wipe the sweat from his brow, not forgetting to remind him that they now have a guest in the house. She tells him that in the future, when he gets up in the morning, he mustn't walk around without a shirt on. She insists he wear proper shorts so the young lady isn't embarrassed. Meanwhile, his deep, lively eyes remain fixed on his wife. Watching her so carefully clean his face and fret over these small details, he feels a wave of warmth and contentment. Though he feels it might be a bit stifling not to go shirtless in his own home, seeing how serious she is, he can't help but smile. The corners of his mouth lift as he leans in to give Lin Qingshui a light, lingering kiss on her blushing lips. He agrees cheerfully, promising to do whatever she says, while Lin Qingshui turns bright red with embarrassment at this sudden gesture. This display of affection is one thing when they are alone, but now there is a young, single woman living under their roof. She scolds him, calling him truly shameless with a flushed face, though her heart clearly isn't in the reprimand. She tells him not to dawdle and to go wash his hands for dinner before turning away and making a quick escape. He watches his wife's retreating back with a grin, a look of pure satisfaction radiating across his handsome face. A little later, he walks over to the well and pulls up a bucket of cold, refreshing water. He splashes his face. He has sweated quite a bit and feels sticky all over, which is never a pleasant sensation. It is quite uncomfortable, so he takes a quick look around to ensure he is the only one left in the courtyard. He pulls off his sleeveless shirt and pours the bucket of cold water directly over his head, a bold move, certainly. It feels incredibly refreshing, but then, quite unexpectedly, Li Tiantian steps out of her room at that exact moment. At that exact moment, she witnessed the scene, staring at the shirtless man as he stood with his back turned to her. He was revealing a robust physique, one defined by symmetrical muscles and sharp, powerful lines. Noticing several scratch marks on him, Li Tiantian felt her cheeks burn with a sudden, intense embarrassment, and she hurried back into her room. We see that this adobe house lacks any real insulation. It is dark, cramped, and filled with dust in every corner. Li Tiantian felt she couldn't endure living there for even one more day, and a new thought began to take root in her heart. Meanwhile, he finished setting the dishes down on the stone table out in the courtyard. His wife stepped forward and grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the house, while grumbling under her breath. She worried aloud about the cold, asking him what would happen if he were to fall ill from such a stunt. He allowed his wife to drag him inside, and listening to her complaints, his heart filled with warmth, knowing she truly cared for him. Once they were inside the living room, Lin Qingshui reached for a small baby blanket. Standing on her tiptoes, she began to carefully wipe the water from his head. She was so focused on the task that she didn't even blink, keeping her head down in concentration. In her haste, she didn't realize he was watching her with a gentle, lingering smile on his face. Following his wife's instructions, he quickly widened his stance and lowered his head obediently. As he let her dry him off, he asked if he might be able to wear his new clothes the following morning. He wanted to see how they looked, but upon hearing this, Lin Qingshui's hands paused for a brief moment. Without saying a word, she saw that his hair was nearly dry and moved behind him to continue. She began to dry his back, moving inch by inch with deliberate care. As she looked at the marks on his back, her face remained unreadable, betraying nothing of her thoughts. She had never felt quite like this before, and at the mere thought of it, her heart began to beat wildly. She turned her back to him, thrusting the small blanket into his arms and telling him he could finish drying his front himself. She instructed him to put his trousers on once he was done and to come out for dinner. Lin Qingshui pulled back the curtain and stepped out, crossing paths with Zheng Zuanjian and Li Tiantian, who was just leaving the West Room. The two women shared a brief smile, though neither of them said a single word. In these old adobe houses, privacy is a luxury. One can hear everything, even the sounds of the animals near the West Room. Li Tiantian stood there awkwardly, unsure whether she should take a seat or remain standing. She felt deeply uncomfortable, wondering if things would feel even more tense once night finally fell. After changing his trousers and pulling on a gray shirt, he stepped outside with long, confident strides. He took a seat on the stone stool near the West Room and cast a quiet glance at the stone table. We see that the scrambled eggs from that morning had been left almost entirely untouched. Not a single one of the 8 pieces of meat had been eaten either, which was quite telling, really. His brow furrowed as he turned his gaze toward the West Room, his expression darkening. Lin Qingshui had just picked up her chopsticks when she looked up and saw his somber face and deep frown. Her heart skipped a beat, and with a sudden tremble of her hand, her chopsticks hit the floor with a sharp clatter. In that moment, she felt utterly defeated, as if her true fears had been exposed far too quickly. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that she could hold out and keep her composure just a little longer. The brief dream of peace ended abruptly. She set down her remaining chopstick and carefully avoided his gaze. Taking a deep breath, she managed to eat half a bun and nibble on 2 small pieces of egg. Her voice remained calm, but her hands were gripping her old clothes with a desperate, hidden strength. Her entire body was trembling, and it was only the sound of the chopsticks falling that finally brought him back to his senses. We notice that something isn't quite right, and as we look closer, we see that Lin Qingshui's eyes are red and swollen. They are damp, like a flower battered by the rain, and seeing her like this makes his heart tighten with guilt. He panics immediately. He only wanted her to eat more, but he hadn't realized his tone had become so harsh. He had frightened her, and when he reaches out to pull her into an embrace, she instinctively flinches away. This only makes him more nervous, and so this clumsy giant of a man crouches down outside the West Room. With a face full of panic, he tells his wife that he was simply feeling a bit anxious a moment ago. He truly didn't mean to scold her, but hearing his voice turn gentle is the final straw for Lin Qingshui's composure. The tears begin to fall freely, and she confesses that she was truly terrified just a moment ago. She had been certain that he had turned back into that violent demon she once knew. A demon who would strike her, and feeling a pain that cuts to his very core, he lifts her up into his arms. He carries her quickly into the winter house, leaving Li Tiantian sitting on the stone bench in utter confusion. She wonders what on earth just happened, now that she is the only one left alone in the courtyard. Inside, he gazes down at the woman in his arms with a look of profound sorrow. Her eyes are raw from crying, and her delicate nose has turned a soft shade of red. To be honest, it feels to him as if his own heart is being repeatedly stabbed with a knife. The pain is almost physical, and so he leans his head down to press a tender kiss against her eyelids. He whispers that he is sorry, and that he was truly, deeply in the wrong. He explains that he was only afraid that she wouldn't eat enough to stay healthy. Since he is busy outside all day, he can't be there to watch over her and make sure she eats properly. In a moment of impatience, his tone had hardened, but hearing this, Lin Qingshui finally feels a slight sense of relief. She also felt, deep down, that her own reaction a moment ago had been a bit excessive. Lately, being so pampered and protected by him, she had become rather delicate. Now that everything had been said, she felt even more embarrassed by the situation. Her pale fingers gripped the shirt at his chest tightly, her eyelids drooping as she bit her lower lip. She didn't say a word, and then, without any warning, he addressed her as his wife. He asked what was wrong, and following the direction of his gaze, Lin Qingshui finally realized the problem. It seemed she was experiencing a leak of breast milk. Yes, at the most awkward moment possible. Before she could even respond, he thought back to all the rich food she had been eating lately. There had been chicken soup, fish, tofu, and even stewed venison. Their daughter had been eating plenty lately, and as the thought crossed her mind, Lin Qingshui's pale cheeks flushed. Her face turned as red as a ripe persimmon, and she quickly pulled away from his arms, turning her back to him. She admitted with a soft voice that she had been breaking into cold sweats from the discomfort. She explained that she had been drinking chicken and fish soup every single day. She wasn't sure if it was helping, but for the past 2 days, the baby had only wanted breast milk and refused formula. But even so, she still had a significant oversupply of milk. It had been hurting her like this during the day, and last night was exactly the same. Today hadn't been quite as uncomfortable, yet the milk had still leaked through. Blushing deeply, she lowered her head and began to unfasten her buttons, completely unaware of his gaze. He was staring intently at her every movement, watching with a mix of longing and desperation. Lin Qingshui had barely removed her blouse when she finally realized this shameless man was watching her. Suddenly, she felt a wave of embarrassment and anger wash over her. She asked him what he was doing and told him to leave quickly so she could change her clothes. He had no intention of leaving, however, and instead, he leaned his head just a little closer. He called her his wife and reminded her that the little girl was still sleeping. He noted how swollen and uncomfortable she was and offered to help her himself. After saying that, he didn't give Lin Qingshui even a single moment to react. Meanwhile, we see Li Tintin sitting on a stone stool outside. With her hand on her cheek, she noticed that it had already grown dark. The stars and the moon had already come out, yet the couple still hadn't emerged. She didn't quite dare to rush inside to see what was happening. She could only wait, and after a long time, the two of them finally stepped out of the house. Li Tintin noticed that the corners of her young sister-in-law's eyes were slightly damp. Her cheeks were flushed pink, and her lips looked red and quite lovely. It seemed she had been thoroughly convinced. When Lin Qingshui saw Li Tintin watching her, and thought back to what had just happened, her face grew incredibly warm. She sat down, picked up the chopsticks, and handed them to Li Tintin as a sign to start eating. Then she took another pair of chopsticks and handed them to the man sitting beside her. After he sat down, he didn't give Li Tintin so much as a single glance during the entire process. He simply took a fine flour bun and placed it gently into his wife's hand. He took a coarse grain bun for himself and ate it hungrily, already planning to head to the reservoir soon. He told himself he needed to catch some carp to properly nourish his wife. Lin Qingshui, of course, had no idea what was going through the man's mind. She was more concerned that Li Tintin might be feeling a bit uncomfortable. She handed her a fine flour bun, telling her to eat and not be shy. She urged her to feel at home, and Li Tintin took a small bite, feeling quite bewildered. She wondered, was this family poor or rich? If they were poor, why were they eating fine buns? The dishes on the table were scrambled eggs and meat, after all. These conditions were certainly no worse than what the team leader's family ate in the morning. And yet, there were also black corn buns paired with simple pickled radishes. If she called them rich, they were still living in a modest 3-room adobe house. Aside from the television set, which, to be honest, didn't even have a decent piece of furniture to sit on. Even the bed she slept on was just a few wooden boards thrown together at random. She was genuinely afraid the whole thing might collapse if she turned over during the night. Then she remembered hearing her talk to the tractor driver about building a new house earlier that day. So, we have to wonder, would this old house eventually be demolished? By then, she worried she wouldn't even have a place to live. Why would they keep her around anyway? It was clear this older brother only had eyes for his young wife. He didn't seem to have much patience for anyone else. He clearly wasn't enjoying her presence. While she was lost in these wild thoughts, the sound of a child crying drifted out from the house. In the very next second, Lin Qingshui stood up to go to her. He told Lin Qingshui to stay where she was and keep eating. He quickly stepped into the house and flicked on the light. He gently lifted their daughter, who had just woken up from her small bed. Lin Qingshui set down her chopsticks and reached out her hands to take the baby. But he moved away, telling her to finish her meal first. She insisted she wasn't hungry yet and would eat later, a classic white lie, of course. He knew perfectly well she was only saying that so he could eat his own dinner first. After all, since returning from out of town, she had been busy outside clearing away debris. How could she not be hungry? He didn't call her out on it, though. He just kept eating. Li Tintin lowered her eyes and nibbled her bun, secretly watching how the couple interacted. She couldn't help but compare them to her own family, where her brothers never touched the children. Her sisters-in-law were always the ones comforting crying babies while trying to eat at the same time. Yet here was this older brother, taking over the parenting duties so the mother could rest. Li Tintin watched from the house as he walked back and forth in the courtyard to soothe the girl. It seemed incredible to her. Lin Qingshui finished quickly and took the child back into her arms. Once she was gone, Li Tintin stole a glance at the young man sitting across from her. He began taking large bites of his bun, his focus entirely on the meal. As he ate the scrambled eggs, his handsome face remained expressionless, cold, and distant. It was a complete transformation from the warmth he showed when his young wife was present. Seeing this side of him, Li Tintin couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable and hesitant, she finally spoke up, telling her older brother that she was full. She gathered the dishes, took them to the kitchen to wash them immediately, and retreated to the west room, not daring to come out again. By now, it was completely dark, and we see him sitting all alone in the quiet courtyard. He finished the 4 remaining coarse grain buns and only felt truly full after finishing the noodle soup. Afterward, he boiled more water and carried the basin back into the house. He gently reminded his wife to wash up, showing a level of care that was, to be honest, quite touching. He told her he was heading to the bathroom and set the basin down on the shelf for her. He stepped out and closed the door. While inside, she undressed to take a warm sponge bath. She had barely finished dressing after washing when she suddenly heard a suspicious noise coming from behind the house. At first, she thought she had imagined it, but a second later, a man's voice drifted in from outside, calling her little sister. The voice asked if she was showering. Lin Qingshui felt her skin crawl, and she let out a piercing scream. Outside, he had just pulled up his trousers when he heard the cry and rushed in, catching her as she threw herself into his arms. He held her tightly, his voice filled with concern as he asked her what was wrong. Lin Qingshui wrapped both arms around his waist, clinging to him as if her life depended on it. Her entire body was trembling as she managed to gasp out that someone had been behind the house just a moment ago. He looked up, his dark eyes scanning the area beyond the courtyard wall, and sure enough, he spotted something. He saw a head duck away, someone running hurriedly into the distance under the cover of night. In that brief instant, his deep eyes flashed with a cold, impressive intensity that boded ill for the intruder. He pulled his gaze back to the woman in his arms, noticing she was still only wearing her thin undergarments. He lifted her up gently and placed her back onto the safety of the bed. He stepped out of the bedroom and spoke to Li Tian, who was standing there waiting. Standing by the door of the west room, he asked her to look after his wife for him. He told her he was heading out for just a moment, and without another word, he was gone. We see him stride out of the courtyard, his tall figure vanishing into the darkness toward Desai's house. Soon, the neighbors heard Desai's pitiful cries mixed with the dull, heavy thud of fists hitting bone. They listened with sinking hearts, well aware that he was a tough man, and a cruel one when provoked. It wasn't entirely clear to them how Desai had managed to cross him this time, but judging by the sheer violence of the noise, he was being exceptionally harsh. The neighbors feared he might actually kill the man, as Desai begged for mercy, calling him fourth brother. He confessed he'd gone to see the young intellectual, Li Tian, but swore he hadn't seen a thing. Upon hearing Desai's pathetic pleas, he simply reached out and dislocated the man's jaw, a brutal efficiency. He asked the man what nonsense he was spewing, mockingly asking if he hadn't been craving meat. He repeated the question about the meat, while Desai could only stammer that he had been wrong. By now, Desai didn't even have the strength left to pull himself up or even kneel. The man was absolutely terrified, certain that this would be the moment he was beaten to death. And for a fleeting second, he truly did consider finishing the intruder off right then and there. But as he thought of Lin Qingshui and her daughter, he decided not to be quite so heartless. Meanwhile, Lin Qingshui lay in bed, waiting stubbornly as a significant amount of time passed by. Eventually, she heard the sound of running water in the courtyard and knew that he had finally returned. He was taking a cold shower, and 10 minutes later, she heard the familiar sound of the door opening. In the darkness, he assumed she had already fallen asleep and entered the room in complete silence. Just as he was about to slip into bed in the shadows, a soft voice drifted toward him. Asking if he was finally back, Lin Qingshui reached out her hand to turn on the light. The room was suddenly illuminated, and we see him freeze mid-motion. He looked at her as she rested her head, watching him from the bed. Her shiny black hair was scattered over her snow-white shoulders, a striking sight, to be sure. His gaze darkened as he climbed into bed and immediately switched off the light. In the darkness, he pulled her close by her slender waist, gently patting her back to soothe her. He told her it was all right and urged his wife to get some sleep. Before his return, she hadn't dared to close her eyes for even a second. She had been terrified that he might lose control and accidentally beat someone to death. She also worried, quite naturally, that the townspeople would start whispering more rumors about him. Frightened by the night's events, she curled up in his arms like a small kitten seeking shelter. Her cheek was pressed firmly against his chest, feeling the heat of his skin. He was warm and bare, and she listened to the strong, steady rhythm of his heart. She gradually drifted off, not daring to cry out loud for fear of waking their daughter. Seeing his wife in such a state, he couldn't help but feel a sense of lingering disgust. He had believed that with his reputation, the local thugs wouldn't dare cross his threshold. He hadn't expected that anyone would be bold enough to harbor such impure thoughts about her. But after today, those who entertained such ideas would likely think twice before acting. As she gazed at the man's exhausted face, she couldn't help but think of how he had been leaving early and returning late every single day. He had been hauling stones just to earn a bit of money, only to turn around and give every cent of it to her. He was protecting her, trying to please her, and she realized that he truly had changed, for the better, it seemed. There in the heavy silence of the dark room, Lin Qingshui wept quietly to herself. She eventually drifted into a soft sleep, and hearing her steady breathing, he finally allowed himself a sigh of relief. On the following day, Lin Qingshui was startled awake by a sudden commotion drifting in from outside while she was still resting. Out in the courtyard, we see sister-in-law Zhao adding a generous handful of white sugar to a pot of boiled water. She was busy serving a cup to every person who had come to work that morning. In these times, you see, sugar is a rare and precious luxury. To be honest, almost no family in the village would dare to spend their money on it under normal circumstances. Qiao Fenji finished a bowl of the sweetened water and leaned in close to sister-in-law Zhao, whispering with a curious glint in her eye. She asked the elder sister-in-law if she hadn't heard the sound of her daughter-in-law screaming at home the night before. Sister-in-law Zhao set down the teapot and looked at Qiao Fenji, whose face was practically glowing with the need to gossip. She remarked that Qiao's house was nearly 2 li away from her own, which made the observation rather impressive. She asked if she had really heard it, wondering aloud if the woman simply had nothing better to do with her nights. She even teased her, asking if she spent her evenings crouching under the young couple's window just to eavesdrop. Qiao Fenji simply smiled without answering, remembering the rumors that he had beaten Heir Desai half to death the previous night. The word was that he had even broken the man's leg, which seemed to confirm that his city-born wife was up to no good. In her mind, it was clear that the wife must have been cheating behind his back, and he had finally caught her. She found she couldn't suppress the burning desire to share this little theory with everyone else. Sister-in-law Zhao, however, didn't even bother to pay her any attention. She simply picked up the teapot and continued serving water to the other workers. She then walked over to him and served him a bowl of the precious sugar water. She suggested he go check on Qingshui, noting that she would usually be awake by this hour. She worried aloud that the girl might be ill and told him to take a break from stacking bricks. We recall that when he had gotten up earlier that morning, she was still fast asleep. It was now 10 o'clock, so he decided to pull back the curtain and step into the bedroom. The very moment he opened the door, Lin Qingshui began to stir and woke up. He immediately leaned in to embrace her, whispering softly in her ear that she should get dressed. His voice was a bit raspy as he promised to bring her some food to eat in just a little while. The curtains remained drawn, but the commotion from outside was impossible to ignore. Lin Qingshui, naturally curious about the ruckus, couldn't help but ask what was happening. She wanted to know why there was so much noise coming from the courtyard. He replied with a smile, explaining that they were currently renovating the courtyard wall. It was a bit of a chaotic scene, so he told his wife it was better if she didn't go out just yet. He mentioned he still had work to do outside, prompting her to ask why he wouldn't let her go. Instead of loosening his grip, he held her even tighter and spoke to her tenderly. He asked her for a kiss, but she told him not to be silly and to let her go quickly. She reminded him that there were people right outside, but he insisted he wasn't doing anything wrong. He teased her, saying it was a shame his own wife didn't even want to give him a single kiss. He asked if she didn't like him anymore, his tone carrying a hint of both grievance and a playful threat. Lin Qingshui originally wanted to explain herself, but in the end, she decided to say nothing at all. Instead, she leaned in and gave him a soft, gentle kiss on the cheek. She asked if that was enough and told him to let go, noticing the sudden spark in his handsome eyes after the kiss. He happily cupped her face and kissed her back, while she admitted she was getting bored staying inside the house. She expressed her desire to go out and help, but he didn't think twice before flatly refusing her request. He suggested that if she was bored, her sister-in-law could come over to chat with her in a little while. Lin Qingshui knew deep down that trying to go out and help would be a useless endeavor. Seeing that he wasn't willing to open the door, she went back to the bedroom, a bit bored, to play with her daughter. With so many people helping out in secret, the courtyard wall was finally finished by 4 o'clock that afternoon. We see the new 2-meter-high wall is now completely covered in sharp fragments of broken glass. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to scale it without the help of a ladder. It is difficult enough to climb a 2-meter wall, let alone one topped with jagged glass shards. The plan was simple: finish the courtyard wall first before starting work on the house itself. This was a first for everyone. Behind the house, Chao Fengjia's brother couldn't help but smile at the progress. One woman claimed that the other night, she saw her Laosai sneaking out of Lin Qingshui's room while she was heading to the bathroom. Xenonxia exclaimed that she feared the two of them had been up to no good. Another replied that it was impossible, for if it were true, Lin Qingshui would be far too shameless. The two sisters-in-law continued to whisper and wink at each other, spreading their petty gossip. That look of pure contempt toward Lin Qingshui, it did not go unnoticed by him, as he had been watching them closely. He overheard every single word they said, without missing a single detail. To be perfectly honest, these two women truly deserved a lesson for their behavior. He told himself that, sooner or later, he would have to teach these two daughters-in-law a lesson. It turned out they were exactly that kind of person, claiming they came to help when they didn't. But in reality, they only came to drink the sugar water. We can see the truth of it right there. Chao Fengjie even brought her own teacup, and her pockets were visibly bulging with stolen goods. It seemed she had helped herself to many of the snacks intended for the actual workers. And so, he began to contemplate exactly how to punish Chao Fengjie and Xenonxia. To avoid future trouble, he decided to handle them once and for all, heading to Zhao Wangasang's house after dinner. We learn that Wangasang and his two sons had never separated and still lived together under one roof. When he arrived, the entire Wang family was in the middle of their evening meal. Everyone was quite surprised to see him. "Zhen Zhao, have you eaten yet?" they asked. As Zhao Wangasang spoke, Lu Shuqian, the wife of Zhao Er, simply continued shoveling rice into her mouth. She saw him walking toward her, but she didn't think much of it at the time. He approached Chao Fengjie step by step, and then, quite suddenly, he grabbed her by the hair. This sudden, violent action left everyone in the room completely stunned. As Chao Fengjie let out a sharp cry, the rest of the family finally snapped back to reality. Wang jumped to his feet, shouting, "Zhao Er, what on earth do you think you're doing?" He only offered a cold, thin smile in response. "What am I doing?" He told him to ask his own wife, for Chao Fengjie never expected her gossip to catch up with her so quickly. He must have sent her over your dreams to the very end. Looking into Zhao Er's eyes, there is a coldness that Guosong Zong, being better than most, thinks is no accident. For a long time, the problems of the evening had been brewing, and now we see the signs of it clearly coming to the surface. In this particular aspect of their lives, the tension was rising, converting what should have been a quiet evening into something far more volatile. He spoke his mind in a way that couldn't be rebuilt, making it clear that things had changed between them. He told her she was no better herself. Xenonxia felt a bit ashamed and looked at her husband, Wang, who didn't say a word, obviously not wanting to get involved in this mess. He raised his hand and slapped Chao Fengjie across the face, telling her he'd destroy her mouth if she kept talking nonsense. Chao Fengjie was stunned. She truly never expected this. She hadn't imagined he would actually dare. No one in the family stopped him as he gave her 6 slaps before letting go. Chao Fengjie saw stars and could barely stand. She stumbled and threw herself toward Wang, but her own husband pushed her away with force. Wanda Sen said slowly, "You are a hitter, Zhen Wolian," while Lu Shuqian watched. He noted that Chao Fengjie was clever with her games, but possessed a poisonous heart, unable to stand seeing Zhen Wolian doing well, which led her to spread such lies. It was obvious she was creating discord, and in that moment, no one cared if she was hit. She tried to deny it, claiming she never said those things, but she had no escape. He challenged her to swear. If she lied, let her family die and her parents and children find no peace. Chao Fengjie was far too young to be a match for his intensity. Just 2 sentences were enough to shut Chao Fengjie's mouth. She grew nervous and stammered, unable to speak. Everyone present understood exactly what had happened. He looked at everyone and made it clear, if he heard anyone spreading rumors or creating discord between him and his wife, he wouldn't show any mercy or take responsibility for the consequences. After saying that, he gave Chao Fengjie 2 more kicks. Wang then approached and began to hit and kick his own wife until her face was swollen and she begged for mercy. Still, no one dared to intervene. He didn't leave yet, as he clearly hadn't calmed down, and anyone who stepped in would surely face his bad luck. Finally, Yu Shuqing sighed. She said it was enough, noting that if she was injured further, they'd only have to spend money to heal her. Wang's raised hand fell one last time, making her mouth bleed. He snorted, warning her to stop being foolish or he'd sew her mouth shut next time. After delivering this final threat, he finally turned and walked away. Inside the house, there was no sound left but Chao Fengjie's crying. Having punished her, he felt satisfied and returned home to his wife. Seeing him leave, Wanda Sen winked at Lu Shuqian. He asked her to take the two daughters-in-law to the kitchen to clean. In the center of the room, Wanda-sen smoked intensely, tapping the table with his pipe. He warned Wang and Wang Yan to control their wives, stating that if there was more trouble with Xiaoxi's family, he couldn't protect them, as Xiaoxi had recently learned to be dangerous. He has good manners, but it seems to me he's even more disorganized. The two brothers, Wang and Wang Yan, lower their heads, not daring to say a word as the old wooden door creaks. The door opens, and Chao Fingjie closes her eyes hurriedly, unsure of what to do. They've been married for months, yet her womb shows no sign of life, and her in-laws and husband were just watching. A moment ago, they didn't even flinch when she was being beaten. What kind of people are these? Wang enters without a word and sits on the edge of the bed, lost in deep thought, his heart heavy. He is very confused and restless. His younger cousin is no simple man, and his father's intent is clearly not to provoke him. But his wife is beautiful, and letting her go completely is difficult. She isn't willing to leave either. They look into each other's eyes in silence until, after a while, Chao Fingjie stands up and admits she was wrong, which leaves Wang a bit surprised. He says nothing. She promises to behave in the future and live properly with him, swearing not to leave the house, while Wang simply stares at her for a long moment. He turns his head and leaves. Chao Fingjie watches his back, unsure of her next move or if she should take the initiative. Today's beating certainly cannot be in vain. One morning, we see Lin Kin-su taking out the fermented dough. Niao is quite tall now, and she has to lean in to embrace him fully. Niao pushes her with strength, and Lin Kin-su shudders, only calming down once she catches that familiar scent. He babbles, unable to turn away. She discovers he is staring at the food in her hand and smiles softly, placing a pancake in his mouth. It's delicious, and his smile is sincere and natural. He tells her she doesn't really have to get up so early to cook for him, suggesting she sleep more with the child. But since he goes hunting in the cold mountains, she insists on a hot meal. A few days ago, she saw him leave with only a dry basket and realized he had nothing to eat, so naturally, she wants to help. After breakfast, he puts on his high boots. He picks up the basket and heads for the mountain. After walking for nearly 2 hours, he successfully finds the shoe plant, takes out his tools, and sets to work near noon. Once all the shoe is gathered, seeing that it's still early, he doesn't head down immediately, instead searching for dry wood to try his luck, and he soon finds a great spot. He walks with long strides. Are those mushrooms? He wonders where one would see mushrooms so red and bright, looking like those rare dried varieties. They are actually 4 musk deer of different shapes and sizes. To be honest, this was a find he didn't expect. Today has certainly been worth the trip to this mountain. It seems his luck is finally beginning to turn. He wonders how he hadn't noticed before that this deep mountain is so full of treasures. It's a realization that changes everything. He sets down the carrying basket, clears some leafy grass to pad the bottom, and reaches for his sharp blade. He carefully cuts the musk deer and places them inside, covering them with a thick layer of grass, just as he prepares to leave. Out of the corner of his eye, he catches sight of a discreet little hole next to a tree with shiny leaves, surrounded by loose soil and fresh tracks. Those, as it turns out, are the unmistakable footprints left behind by a badger. It appears to be a badger's den, and he knows all too well that badger meat is quite the delicacy. He thinks it could strengthen his wife's body, and badger oil is a valuable medicine, but these creatures are notoriously cunning. Capturing them directly is no easy feat, so he decides to try his luck with the smoking method, searching through his belongings. He finds a small handful of dried chilies and carefully stuffs them along with some dry firewood into the entrance of the hole. The firelight begins to dance and a thick smoke rises, drifting steadily into the badger's burrow. He retreats to the side and waits patiently, knowing that once the badger senses the smoke, it will instinctively seek an exit to escape. And there he is, ready at the entrance, waiting for the creature to fall into his trap. It is, to be honest, a bit of a gamble. Badgers are master excavators, and the design of their burrows is ingenious, often featuring multiple hidden exits. He recalled hearing in a nature documentary that some badger dens can even have more than 130 different exits. Time passes minute by minute. The mountain remains silent, save for the occasional, distant song of a bird. He stares intently at the hole, his palms sweating slightly, waiting for nearly half an hour without seeing a single sign of movement. Just as he is about to give up and prepare to extinguish the fire with damp branches, there is a sudden rustle at the entrance. A furry badger head pokes out, eyes gleaming with panic in the smoke, before its entire body bolts toward the net. He is quick as lightning. With a swift motion, he pulls the cord, trapping the badger firmly inside the net. This particular badger weighs approximately 20 jin, or about 10 kilograms. Given there was only a 1 in 6 chance of it picking this specific exit, he is more than satisfied with his catch. He takes some water to ensure the fire is completely extinguished before turning around to begin his descent down the mountain. Meanwhile, back at the house, word has spread among the villagers that he bought a television, and several have curiously come to visit. They were all eager to see this television everyone was talking about, the one from the city, after waiting the entire day. We see the house is a hive of activity, with neighbors coming and going in constant waves. During the commotion, some villagers noticed Zhao Zingxin delivering a mountain of construction materials. Upon learning he planned to build a house, their faces were masks of pure shock. The comments were flying, and the general consensus was that he couldn't possibly pull it off. Surely he didn't have that kind of money. Behind his back, they whispered that he had no idea how to manage his life, claiming that spending so much on a mere iron box was utterly useless. In their eyes, he was simply throwing money away and inviting disaster upon himself. Of course, there is always a bit of history behind such judgments, and luck is a fickle thing. It seemed his success today was pushing the limits of what they considered reasonable. They wondered how he could have such consistent good luck, as it's true that one can't expect a bounty every single time he returns from the mountain. Lin Qinsu was wearing a red sweater with silver stars that made her skin look delicate and radiant, almost dazzling him as he approached her. He leaned in, lowering his head to steal a kiss on her cheek, but she blushed and pulled away, thinking he was being far too bold in broad daylight. Tian and his sister-in-law were right there, and he suddenly realized several other villagers were inside, watching them with curious eyes. Lin Qinsu anticipated his question and explained that the neighbors wanted to see the TV. Fortunately, his sister-in-law had arrived to help host them. He nodded, wanting to pick up the child, but noticing his clothes were dirty, he carried his basket to the kitchen and whispered a few words to his wife. Lin Qinsu glanced at the basket and nodded, understanding, though she wasn't sure exactly what he'd brought back or why he had to head to the city so early tomorrow. She didn't ask much, given the house was full of strangers, but she couldn't help but notice how much this man had changed lately. He caught her looking at him secretly and grinned from ear to ear, leaning in to give his wife a quick kiss while asking if she had eaten well today. He said this while his hands remained busy, gently checking her waist and worrying that she was far too thin for her height. He told her that even when he wasn't home to supervise, she had to eat properly, pulling her into a warm embrace while she held the baby. She looked at him with a hint of reproach for his public display of affection, just as her sister-in-law called out from the other room that she was coming back. Lin Qinsu quickly stops her sister-in-law, asking her to wait a moment while she hands over her daughter. She then leaves the kitchen for the east room to fetch a bag of rock sugar. She presses it into her sister-in-law's hand, fearing that if she hesitated, the woman might refuse such a rare treat, something Lin herself rarely indulges in, but this was different. Without her sister-in-law's constant help, life for this mother and daughter would have been far more difficult, especially considering the family politics involved in these small gestures. We see that if she hadn't come to help, Lin would have struggled to host so many people. Having relied on her kindness when they were poor, she now wants to return the favor. She feels she can't keep taking advantage of people, and her sister-in-law truly deserves it, so she insists the children enjoy it, leaving the woman completely stunned by the gift. Staring at the half-pound of rock sugar in her hand, the sister-in-law tries to return it, suggesting it be saved for the child since sugar water is usually reserved for the most distinguished guests. In this village, bringing such a gift to a bride's family would be a source of immense pride, and the two women struggle back and forth until the bag nearly tears. Finally, the sister-in-law shyly accepts the sugar and heads home, while Lin Qinsu begins to worry that her husband might be angry about her making decisions without him. She explains, stuttering slightly, how grateful she was for the help during the chaos of the crowd, admitting she was so dizzy from work she nearly forgot to eat. She begs him not to be angry about the rock sugar and asks him not to do anything foolish like trying to go and ask for it back. Watching his wife tremble like that feels like a hand squeezing his heart. He realizes that, deep down, she still doesn't fully trust that his old, violent temper is gone. When he remains silent, Lin Qinsu grows even more terrified, as if she's committed a grave sin, lowering her head and sobbing that she won't do it again if he'll just stay calm. He places one arm around his daughter and the other around his wife, knowing there are things that must be cleared up immediately, as misunderstandings shouldn't be left to fester. He knows that when a couple stops communicating, everything falls apart, so he gently pats her back and rubs his chin against her hair to soothe her. In a very soft tone, he reminds her that she is the one in charge of their home and the money, and whatever she decides is final, which, to be honest, is a major change. He tells her it's just a bag of sugar and they can always buy more tomorrow, but he realizes that words alone aren't enough. Only then does Lin Qinsu begin to feel relieved. Just a moment ago, she hadn't even dared to breathe for fear he would change his mind, but as her breathing steadies, he feels a sense of peace as well. He decides that from now on, he must talk with her every night. He wants to take her to the city to relax, but he knows she still harbors deep fears about the outside world. She still fears that a trip to the city might result in him selling their daughter, so he suggests a simpler walk to the foot of the mountain instead. He offers to catch a quail for her, and Lin Qinsu feels a spark of interest, not because she's hungry, but because he hasn't let her work in the fields lately. Instead of pushing her to earn work points, he lets her recover at home and care for the baby. After all, she had returned to the fields the day after giving birth. Now, however, he truly worries for her, though she wonders what favor he did for Accountant Wang, since neither of them is currently working in the fields. We see him gently insisting as he notices her hesitation. She glances toward the courtyard, clearly worried that if they leave, their belongings won't be safe. He lets out a hearty laugh and tells her not to worry, then steps out of the kitchen with the child in his arms to speak with the others. Whatever he says works, as everyone leaves the main hall, even Li Tiantian, who secretly wanted to join the family of 3 on their walk to the mountain. There are rumors of wildfires on that mountain that keep the young intellectuals away, but Li knows when she isn't welcome and decides to wander the village instead. As they walk, he notices his wife stealing glances at him. He stops and looks back at her with anticipation, though the moment seems to stretch on. And the moment continues, without passing by, and it lingers there, and you don't let it go, and the time doesn't pass, and you don't let it go, and the time doesn't pass, and the time doesn't pass, and you don't let it pass, and not it pass, and not letting it pass, and you don't let it pass, and not letting it pass, and you don't let 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 it pass. Heated and bent after countless polishes and adjustments, the bowstring is made of premium cowhide. It feels heavy in his hand, and his eyes are as sharp as a hawk's. He stares intently at the sky in search of a target. Finally, in the last ray of the afternoon sun, a wild goose flies slowly into view, flapping its wings as if it were untouchable. He takes a deep breath and calms himself, slowly raising the slingshot. The range of the slingshot is limited, and the goose is flying very high. But he has his own method, and he starts with a burst of 3 shots. The first stone flies toward the sky, the second follows closely, hitting the first, and then the third. The third immediately strikes the first 2, chasing that figure about to disappear on the horizon with a whistling sound. Finally, the first stone, under the impact of the last 2, accurately strikes the wing of the wild goose. The bird's body stops abruptly, losing balance, and after spinning in the air, it falls helplessly. An indescribable enthusiasm rises in his heart, and he feels proud. She, meanwhile, squeezes her own slingshot, her gaze following the fall of the goose until it lands firmly in the grass nearby. As he heads down with the goose, his young wife is hurriedly climbing the mountain with the child in her arms. Seeing this, her heart leaps into her throat as she navigates the mountain path. The path is incredibly slippery, and he quickly opens his mouth to stop her, shouting for her to stay down. His voice trembles as she grips the grass, watching the mountain. Who knows how much fear she felt in that moment, dreading that something might happen to this man on the mountain. She simply couldn't bear to imagine what she would do. He realizes something is wrong with his wife, and he's no longer in the mood for hunting. He forces himself to call out, telling her he's coming down and to stay put. Descending quickly to the foot of the mountain, he reaches her with the goose in hand. Looking into her red eyes, he asks what's wrong and if she's cold, suggesting they go. Lin Qinsu says nothing. She simply turns around, hugs the child, and walks ahead, her anxious and fearful heart unable to find peace for a long time. He doesn't understand at all why his wife is suddenly unhappy. Everything was fine when they left, yet in such a short time, her expression has completely changed. He wants to ask for his coat and trousers back, but seeing her sullen face as she holds the child without even looking at him, he realizes there is no way. And so, he follows her bare-chested and in shorts, carrying a goose and a basket of duck eggs. As they pass Li Laoan's house, the old man is there. Crouched on the threshold smoking a dry pipe, he watches Zhao Laoxi's wife walking ahead with the child, clutching Laoxi's clothes, and then he looks at Laoxi. It seems the tough man of the house has been relegated to following behind, while the wife takes charge of the child and the belongings. In the house of the wife, without daring to say a word, they both return home one after the other. He drops the wild goose on the ground and hurries to open the courtyard gate. He stands aside sensibly, waiting for his wife to enter before bending down to retrieve the goose. As they go inside, Lin Qinsu almost laughs at his amusing appearance, but she barely holds it in. She sits on a stool with the child, only then realizing she is still clutching his shirt in her hand. He is still bare-chested after the long walk back. She suddenly remembers old Li's teasing words and wonders how she could have forgotten to give him his clothes. She steals a glance at him, seeing that he isn't angry but is quietly drawing water. She stands up and scolds him, telling him not to use cold water to wash. She promises to heat some water for him while struggling to open the door to put their daughter in her small bed. Hearing his wife speak first, his spirits immediately lift. He turns and sees her struggling with the child, so he quickly sets down the water basin and walks up behind her. He quickly opens the door lock for her. Looking down at his wife as she moves in his arms, he feels truly happy while glancing at his daughter. He tells her he'll shower and prepare dinner. Lin Qinsu says nothing, simply entering the house to lay their sleeping daughter in her small bed, covering her with a blanket. She lifts the curtain and steps out, watching this bare-chested man splashing cold water over himself. He seems to have no temper at all, despite her earlier coldness. She briefly considers letting him freeze, but instead, she grabs his shirt from the stool and heads toward the well while he waits to finish washing up. Drawing a bucket of water, she begins scrubbing his clothes. As she washes, she tells herself that on their next trip to town, she must buy the girl thicker clothes. Autumn is arriving, and the weather is cooling day by day, yet the child still wears thin shirts while her father runs off to the mountains before dawn. The morning dew in the mountains is heavy and the temperature is low. We have to wonder how he doesn't feel the biting cold every single day. His clothes are always covered in mud, likely from kneeling on the ground to dig up medicinal herbs. Meanwhile, he finishes his cold wash with a shiver. Stepping into the house with a damp chill, he takes his wife's towel to dry off before quickly pulling on clean clothes and heading back outside. Seeing that his dirty clothes have already been washed, his heart warms. To be honest, the feeling of having a wife to care for him is truly wonderful. He begins to clean the wild goose he caught, deciding to fry half and make a nourishing soup with the rest for his wife to enjoy. When Li Tian returns, she happens to see him processing the bird. The young woman heads inside, as our scene shifts to the quiet evening tasks. We see him working with a calm focus, his eyes reflecting the steady rhythm of a man who has finally found his purpose within these walls. He handles his tools with precision, preparing the day's catch while the household settles into the familiar sounds of the approaching night. He begins preparing badger fat, which is a valuable medicinal ingredient. It is well known for its healing properties, particularly for the skin. It has excellent moisturizing effects and is quite significant in treating burns and frostbite. He looks outside and sees it is now pitch black. Seeing nothing but darkness, he locks the door and carries the baby across the village to Aunt Zan's house, where Lin Qinsu has been staying. Aunt Zan, seeing him arrive with the child in his arms, fears something is wrong. She drops her work and asks softly what has happened. He simply smiles at his wife and says he just came to see her, sitting down on a small stool. Aunt Zan, being quite sharp, realizes the truth. She teases Lin Qinsu, saying her husband was clearly afraid she'd be scared walking at night and came specifically to escort her home. Lin Qinsu looks at the man on the stool, wondering if it's true. Aunt Zan loves to tease, of course, so perhaps these words shouldn't be taken too seriously. If she only knew he was afraid of the dark. Tian has also come along, so there is no reason for him to make such a long trip. Thinking of this, Lin Qinsu speaks to the man on the stool. She tells him to sit for a while as she'll be finished soon, returning to her desk to stay busy. Meanwhile, his eyes seem glued to his wife as she speaks. He simply watches her attentively, noting her every move. At that moment, Zan Taijun is eating a corn muffin, sitting down beside him on a stool. He remarks that his sister-in-law is truly wonderful. He notes she is more beautiful than Sister Wei, well-educated and well-bred. Hearing Tiejuan's words, he is stunned for a moment, taking a long time to process the thought. He wonders why Taijun would suddenly mention Zan Weili. Seeing his silence, Taijun assumes that his fourth brother is still thinking about that other woman. This worries Taijun deeply. If that were true, his sister-in-law would be truly wronged. After all, she is completely sincere toward him, staying with the family despite their poverty. She lives with him wholeheartedly, showing a profound affection. Thinking of this, Zan Taijun advises him not to think of her anymore and to live well with his wife. He mentions hearing that Sister Wei found a boyfriend in the city who works in a state-run restaurant. Now, whenever she returns, she looks down on everyone. She won't even look people in the eye, and her tone is full of a sad sort of dissatisfaction. Taijun despises her from the bottom of his heart, finding her unbearably arrogant. Simply because she has some beauty, she talks down to everyone. But in terms of appearance, how could she ever compare to his brother's current wife? Taijun can only dream of such luck. He wishes he could have the same good fortune and marry a woman so fair and beautiful. Looking at her, she doesn't even look like she's had a baby. She is quite striking. She seems as fresh as a newly cut cucumber, bright and full of life. He wonders who on earth is gossiping, saying he fell for someone like Zan Weili. To be honest, that kind of person isn't even worthy of shining his shoes. Whether in his past life or this one, he has never looked at her that way, yet the rumor has spread through the village. If his wife hears this, it could cause a massive misunderstanding. He has been watching her the whole time, but seeing that she hasn't looked back once, he begins to feel even worse. At such a short distance, it's impossible that she didn't hear. He wonders if she truly doesn't care, feeling a sudden tightness in his chest. He turns a cold face towards Zan Taijun, asking sharply when exactly he saw him missing that woman. Taijun, seeing this reaction, is suddenly as terrified as a scolded child. He quickly forces a smile, saying he only mentioned it casually. Deep down, he truly admires his brother, who was once a notorious rogue for 10 miles around. Even the local dogs used to cross the street with their tails between their legs when they saw him. If he hadn't saved his wife back then, he never could have married such a good woman. Seeing Tiejuan's cowardly display, he clearly isn't pleased. Not wanting to waste any more breath, he reluctantly tells him to just get out of there. Zan Taijun grabs his stool and runs off quickly. Lin Qinsu, however, has heard every single word of their conversation, gripping her pen so hard her knuckles turn white. Her knuckles were white. It's no wonder he has changed so much lately. It turns out the man she thought was hiding someone in his heart already has a past, which is why he's trying so hard now. She tells herself to stay quiet, but a wave of sadness washes over Lin Qinsu, making her feel terribly low. On the way home, we see him carrying the child, seemingly oblivious to the tension. Li Tiantian follows anxiously, desperate to explain things to his wife. He pleads with her not to listen to Zhan Tiejuan's big mouth, swearing he has absolutely nothing to do with that woman. He insists he doesn't even like that kind of person and that she is the only one in his heart. His tone is incredibly earnest. He nearly raises his hand to the heavens to make a solemn vow. Li Tiantian keeps making signs, her ears practically twitching like antennas as she listens to this domestic drama. She watches his tall frame walking beside her small sister-in-law. His back is hunched like a shrimp. He must be terrified of a misunderstanding. It's quite the fall from grace for a husband, a clear case of being henpecked, to be honest. Seeing that his wife still won't pay him any mind, he feels restless and unsure of what to say. He can only lower his head and follow her in a heavy, awkward silence all the way back home. After arriving, he gently places the sleeping child in the small bed and covers him with a blanket. Then, looking like a wilted plant after a frost, he dejectedly heads to the kitchen to boil water. He crouches before the stove, poking at the fire with a stick and cursing under his breath. He mutters that if he finds out who is spreading these rumors behind his back, he'll give them a beating. He vows to hit them until their own mother wouldn't recognize them. Don't they have anything better to do? It's like adding fuel to a fire. Meanwhile, Lin Qinsu sits on a stool in the room. She is sewing a cotton coat for her daughter to wear this winter, stitch by stitch. Before long, he arrives with a basin of steaming water, walking in with long strides and leaning down. He gently places the basin by his wife's feet and crouches. His large hands reach out to grasp her slender ankles, a sudden movement that brings Lin Qinsu's needlework to a complete halt. She looks down at the man crouching before her, wondering what on earth he is doing. She tries to pull her ankle away, but his grip is surprisingly firm and steady. She can't break free at all. His rough, warm palm brushes against her skin, making her feel a slight tingle. She used to understand his temper, but now, he's become a bit of a mystery. With his head down, he doesn't stop moving, gently removing his wife's cloth shoes. He speaks in a low, soft voice, telling her that she has been working hard all day. He tells her he wants to give her a foot bath to help her relax. Seeing that she couldn't escape his grip anyway, Lin Qinsu simply stops struggling and lowers her gaze. She watches him in silence as he removes her shoes. Once her feet are submerged in the warm water, she feels her heart begin to soften as well. He really has changed a lot lately. Lately, a certain greed has grown in her heart as she finds herself delighting in all the gentleness he provides. And who could blame her, really? Thinking of this, she looks at the man washing her feet and tells him she isn't angry. She says that as long as he stays out of trouble, she will be satisfied. Her white fingers brush through his short hair, her soft fingertips massaging him gently. He doesn't offer a verbal response to her words, but the silence between them feels different now. We see him silently scrubbing his wife's soft, pale feet. Fearing the water has cooled too much, he lifts them out and rests them against his own thigh to keep them warm. He tucks her damp feet beneath his clothes for warmth before reaching for the towel on his shoulder. After drying them, he feels her hand linger softly against his short hair. He leans in, lifting her by the waist to settle her gently onto the bed, whispering that it's late and she should rest her eyes. Then, he slowly climbs in beside her. He confesses that he knows he was an idiot who did many terrible things. He doesn't expect immediate forgiveness, but he pleads for a chance to make amends and be trusted. His words cause Lin Qinsu's rigid body to gradually relax. She is surrounded by his warm presence, a mix of familiar scent and a newfound sincerity that catches her off guard. For the first time in a long while, Lin Qinsu's heart feels truly warm. She lets out a soft, nearly inaudible hum of agreement, but in the silence, he hears it perfectly. The next morning, well before the sun has even thought of rising, he heads to town to catch the first bus. This time, he avoids the pharmacy he visited previously. Selling deer antler and other treasures too often at the same shop might attract the wrong kind of attention. Instead, he chooses a different establishment to present his medicinal herbs. The manager quickly recognizes him as the young man who has been moving large quantities of stock lately. With a smile, he leads him to a private room for a look. He examines the goods carefully and finds everything in order. Though he wonders how the young man finds such items so often, he offers a fair price without any haggling. Even he didn't expect things to go this smoothly. After counting the thick stack of bills and confirming the amount is correct, he tucks the money safely away into his space. He heads to the state-owned mall to buy tonics for his mother-in-law, but unexpectedly, he spots a major benefactor from his previous life, Secretary Wang. He is surprised to see him in this small county, looking so young. The sight of the man brings back a flood of memories from his past life and better times. In less than 10 years, this man would move to City S and be promoted to chief. He wants to say hello, but realizes that in this life, they are complete strangers. He decides to let it go for now, trusting that if it's meant to be, they will meet again in City S. After all, that city is central to his future plans. That was where he lived for decades in his previous life. He finishes picking out his items and prepares to leave, but then he hears a commotion near Secretary Wang. A small crowd is already gathering to watch the spectacle. He pauses, changes direction, and walks over to see the shop assistant grabbing Wang Xinjue's sleeve. The assistant shouts at the man in the yellow socks, calling him unreasonable and demanding he pay the cost for the damaged items if he expects to leave. Wang Xinjue turns around, looking flustered. Apparently, his clothes caught on the counter, causing a plum blossom watch to fall and shatter on the floor. Being a cultured man, he is clearly embarrassed by the assistant's rude behavior. He tries to explain with a reddened face that he isn't running, he simply lacks the cash. He explains that his home is nearby and he'll return with the money, offering his work ID as a guarantee, which the shop assistant promptly takes. She looks at the document and curls her lip, accusing him of using a fake ID and demanding to know who will pay if he disappears. She throws the ID to the floor, but our protagonist leans down to retrieve it for Wang Xinjue before turning to the assistant to ask the price. He calmly offers to pay the debt himself, a gesture that catches the shop assistant completely by surprise. She finally tells him the amount, though she still seems quite skeptical about the whole situation. It was a significant sum, yet he handles the matter with a quiet confidence that leaves the onlookers stunned. Once the payment is settled, the crowd realizes the show is over, letting out a collective whistle before noisily dispersing. Wang Xinjue pushes his glasses up the bridge of his nose, looking up at the man who stands a bit taller than himself. He couldn't help but reflect on how, with so many people watching earlier, not a single soul had been willing to speak up for him. And yet, this complete stranger had stepped in and pulled him out of trouble without saying a single unnecessary word. Looking at the young man's simple clothes, he realizes he doesn't exactly look like someone who has money to burn. To be perfectly honest, that amount of money must have been a small fortune for someone in his position. Thinking of this, Wang Xinjue feels a wave of infinite gratitude toward this mysterious benefactor. It seems that, despite everything, there are still plenty of good people left in the world. He thanks him profusely for the help, explaining that he actually has the cash nearby. He mentions that his money is in his car, which is parked just outside the building. He asks if the young man would mind accompanying him, and our protagonist simply nods in agreement. He follows Wang Xinjue outside and, sure enough, sees a small black car parked right at the edge of the road. In this era, owning and driving a private car was no small feat. It was a true sign of status. It appears the old rumors about the man having a very deep and influential background were entirely true. Wang Xinjue opens the car door, pulls out a bag, and carefully counts out the money before handing it over. He thanks our protagonist once again, calling him young man and asking where he is headed. He offers a ride, and our protagonist accepts the cash without even bothering to count it himself. He slips the money into his pocket, thinking that with so many bags to carry, a car is much better than the bus. Deciding not to stand on ceremony, he simply asks the man to take him home. He gives his home address to Wang Xinjue, who prepares to set off. A moment later, he settles himself into the passenger seat. As they drive, these two people, who normally would never have met, chat away without any awkwardness at all. On the contrary, it was as if they were old friends reunited after many years, talking with total ease. Wang Xinjue had initially assumed this was just an ordinary young man, but the conversation proves him quite wrong. The young man seems unfathomable, possessing a level of shrewdness that someone his age really shouldn't have. He can't help but feel that this person is far more complex than he appears on the surface. Deep down, a thought takes root. Perhaps this young man is destined for truly great things in the future. Before long, the car pulls up right at the entrance to the courtyard. He leans out and exits the car, retrieving the supplements he bought for his mother-in-law from the trunk. He bows slightly, offering his thanks to Wang Xinjue, who remains inside the vehicle. Wang Xinjue responds with a warm smile, saying it was nothing and hoping they might meet again if fate allows. He takes a quick glance at the humble adobe house behind the young man before turning the car around. As the car drives away, our protagonist enters the house and immediately sees his wife. She is holding a man's jacket, and he walks over to place the items he brought into her hands. "What is all this?" she asks, as we see him putting on the jacket she was holding. Lin Chinsu notices him putting it on, but she sees that the collar isn't quite sitting right. Immediately, she steps closer on her tiptoes and reaches out her arm toward him. She extends her hand to fix the collar for him, and once it's perfectly adjusted, she takes a few steps back. She looks him up and down, noting that the shoulder width and size are a perfect fit, as if the garment had been tailor-made for him. She hesitates for a moment, explaining she bought it because of the cold. Seeing her shy, evasive eyes, he realizes she was worried he wouldn't like it, but deep down, he is overjoyed. He steps forward and pulls her into an embrace, thanking her, though he soon realizes they aren't alone. Li Tian is standing there with the child, her eyes wide with shock as she watches him kiss her sister-in-law. She wonders if he's going crazy again, and blushing furiously, she decides it's best to make a quick exit. She hurries into the west room with the child, leaving Lin Chinsu breathless and leaning against his chest. Listening to his steady heartbeat, she softly asks if he's hungry, but he simply leads her into the bedroom. He sits her down on a stool and pulls out a cloth bag he had been carrying close to his body. Lin Chinsu opens the bag, which is still warm from his touch, and finds it filled with large stacks of cash. After checking the door to ensure they are alone, she asks in a trembling whisper why there is so much. She feels a mix of joy and genuine fear, worried that he might be involved in something dangerous. He can't help but laugh at her concern, assuring her that their future earnings will only continue to grow. He suggests that if she feels uneasy, she should accompany him to the city next time to see for herself. After a long silence, she finally nods in agreement, and he leans in to give her a tender kiss on the forehead. He then asks her for 200 yuan, planning to borrow a bicycle to take her to visit her parents. We see him smiling as he recalls the last time he visited his in-laws, a day when the atmosphere was truly tense. He hadn't hesitated for a second back then, moving with an energy that seemed to defy the books he had read. Thinking back to that last encounter, he realized that even though he had 2 hands, he still needed to borrow a bicycle for his wife. Returning to the courtyard, he sat heavily on a pile of stones, pulled a cigarette from his pocket, and struck a match to take a deep drag. He exhaled slowly, thinking that one simply cannot travel with a wife and children without a proper means of transport, no matter how strong one's own legs are. He refused to let his family suffer, yet he had forgotten just how precious a bicycle was in these times. A slight oversight, to be honest. If a family barely dares to use their own bike, they certainly wouldn't lend it to an outsider. He had been so focused on building a house that he forgot about travel. After hiding the money, Lin Chinsu stepped outside and saw him smoking in the yard without a bicycle, realizing he hadn't managed to get one. She softly suggested they could just walk back like they always did, and though he nodded quietly, he sat there feeling the weight of his failure to provide. He knew he had to earn more money as quickly as possible, as the family's needs were growing far too numerous. By 2 in the afternoon, while Lin's mother was washing clothes, a neighbor rushed in shouting excitedly that her daughter and son-in-law had returned. Knowing her son-in-law's reputation, the mother quickly dried her hands on her apron and hurried out, fearing they had come to ask for another loan. At the door, she saw the couple walking toward the house together, surprised to see her son-in-law carrying several large bags in his hands. She welcomed them with a hint of anxiety, first checking on her daughter, who looked radiant in new clothes and was wearing a bright smile. Her heart finally found peace seeing her daughter so happy, a stark contrast to her usual worried expression, and then she noticed the gifts. He had brought malted milk, fruit preserves, a large cut of meat, a wild pheasant, and plenty of duck eggs, clearly a small fortune spent. Despite her joy, she couldn't help but complain about the expense, telling them they were always welcome without bringing so many things as she took the baby. Lin Chinsu simply smiled and stayed silent, remembering how she used to arrive empty-handed and leave with her mother's supplies. For the first time since their marriage, she was arriving with full hands and a full heart, a change that meant everything to her. And with a simple click of the gate, a new chapter for this family truly began. We see him watching everything closely, his eyes taking in every detail of the scene. He felt as though he had to be careful, aware that both the authorities and the neighbors were watching. He looked like a sophisticated city dweller visiting relatives in the countryside, but Uncle Lin knew the truth. He knew his family was poor and lived day to day. As Lin's mother led them inside, she noted her brother's stunned expression with quiet satisfaction. Deep down, she finally felt she could breathe. After years of her daughter's struggling marriage being the neighborhood joke, she could finally hold her head high. She observed her daughter's outfit, no longer the old, ill-fitting rags of the past, but new clothes from head to toe, even rubber-soled shoes. Those shoes looked high quality, and her son-in-law seemed transformed, no longer rushed or stingy. He carried himself with a newfound stability that made him almost unrecognizable. It was no wonder her daughter claimed he had changed. Lin Chinsu sat down and asked where her brother was, while her mother looked down at the baby. She adjusted the little blanket, smiling as she explained he had taken the children to town and would likely be back soon. Just then, Uncle Lin Lian returned covered in dust, pushing a heavy double-bar bicycle. He had heard from villagers that his sister was back with the kids. He worried she had done something foolish again. After all, he felt responsible for her marrying this man who had once been a mere shadow of himself. He leaned the bike against the wall, but upon entering and seeing his brother-in-law, his face darkened instantly, and he fell into a cold silence. Sensing the tension, the mother quickly tried to smooth things over, pointing out that Chunghua had brought a mountain of gifts to see her. Lin Lian glanced at the pile of goods on the table and let out a cold snort before pulling up a stool and sitting down abruptly. He wanted to scold his brother-in-law, but didn't want to upset his mother. Chunghua, however, wasn't surprised by this cold reception given his past behavior. At that moment, Zhao Xiaoyan entered with a child in her arms. Seeing her younger brother, a flash of sadness crossed her eyes even as she forced a smile. She wasn't sure if he had come to borrow money again, as every previous visit had ended in a request that embarrassed her in front of her in-laws. Though her husband never got angry about Chunghua, she felt the shame deeply, remembering how the last request for money had even led to a physical confrontation. The words caught in her throat as she looked at her sister. Chunghua felt a pang of guilt, knowing his past actions had made his sister's life very difficult. He recalled his past life, where after his wife and daughter's tragic end, only his third sister had remained by his side when the rest of the family cut ties. He remembered the secret 20 yuan and the warm boiled eggs she gave him when he left. After his family and sister had suffered so much, he hadn't dared to contact her for years. Later, we learn he heard from a fellow villager that his sister and her husband wanted to start a small business, so he secretly bought the shop they liked and rented it to them for a pittance. For a moment, the room fell into a heavy silence. Lin Qinsu also felt the atmosphere was a bit strange, considering how much they had relied on her family's support these past 2 years. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a bundle of money. To be honest, she hadn't originally known why Chunghwa had insisted she carry such a large sum with her. On the way over, he had explained that these 200 yuan were to repay the debts owed to her mother and brother. Lin's mother was utterly stunned to hear this. Lending money to this man used to be like giving a meat bun to a dog. It never came back. She had never expected a repayment, only hoping he would cause fewer problems. "Mom, this is for you. Chunghwa gave it to me," Lin Qinsu said, tucking the money into her mother's pocket. The older woman was so startled she nearly jumped back. She quickly freed the hand holding the baby and tried to return the money to her daughter, scolding her gently for carrying such a dangerous amount of cash that could easily be lost. Seeing her reaction, Chunghwa quickly intervened, telling her she must accept it. He admitted he had been ignorant before, but promised that from now on, he and Qinsu would live well. He insisted that if she didn't accept the money, his heart wouldn't be at peace. The mother stood there dazed, unable to fathom what could reform a man so completely in such a short time. She looked at her daughter and saw her smiling, signaling her to accept. Only then, with her heart racing, did she tuck the money away, promising to save it for them until they needed it. "When you need it, just come and get it," she said. Meanwhile, Lin Lian watched the scene with a bewildered expression, muttering to himself as he looked at his sister again. She was elegantly dressed, and her eyes were bright, no longer carrying that gloomy look of the past. Seeing her confidence, he decided to trust the situation and let the matter of the money rest. He turned to his wife, Yenner, and told her to prepare some snacks to go with a drink. When Lin Qinsu heard they were going to drink, she suddenly became quite anxious. They had to go home later and had a lot of money at the house. She didn't feel safe leaving it unguarded, and she feared Chunghwa might drink too much and cause another scene. Lin Lian waved her concerns away, insisting they would only have a little and it wouldn't stop them from returning home. Seeing she couldn't convince her brother, she stared at her husband instead. She desperately hoped he wouldn't drink. Receiving the signal from his wife, Chunghwa just smiled, showing all his white teeth, and told her she could be 100% at ease. Lin Qinsu felt a bit annoyed by his confidence. After shooting him a sharp glare, she took her nephew from her sister-in-law's arms and sat to the side, sulking in silence. Zhao Xiaoyan got to work and set up a table in the courtyard, bringing out a bottle of white liquor her husband had been secretly saving. The two men didn't say a word as they sat. They poured the liquor, clinked their bowls, and downed it in one silent gulp. Inside, Lin Qinsu sat holding her little nephew, her eyes fixed on the door with a worried expression. From time to time, seeing her brother drinking and enjoying himself so much with Chunghwa made Lin Qinsu feel quite uneasy. Meanwhile, her mother watched her daughter's every move, noting how attentive she was. It seemed the young couple was getting along well lately, and seeing them like this brought the older woman a sense of true relief. Out in the courtyard, the two men continued their drinking session. Little by little, the conversation began to flow. Lin Ming Liang exhaled a heavy, alcohol-scented breath, his cheeks flushing red as his eyes grew slightly hazy, and he reached out a heavy arm. He placed it over Chunghwa's shoulder and said, "Brother-in-law, for my sister's sake, I'm willing to sit here and drink with you. I won't mention the past troubles. I only hope that from now on you treat her well, otherwise I won't forgive you, even if it costs me my life." You see, the Lin siblings shared a deep affection. In his previous life, after Lin Qinsu's tragic end, Lin Mingliang had beaten Chunghwa nearly to death. If his mother hadn't stopped him, fearing her son would end up in prison, the brother-in-law would have surely killed him to avenge his sister. Chunghwa simply nodded without a word, took the bowl, and downed the 100 grams of strong liquor in a single gulp. To be honest, it was a bold move considering the tension. The liquor was incredibly sharp, burning his stomach as it flowed down his throat. Lin Qinsu couldn't sit still any longer, so she walked out with the child in her arms and shouted, "Hey, aren't we going home?" Hearing his wife's voice, Chunghwa quickly set down the bowl, and a smile spread across his handsome face. He promised her he wouldn't drink anymore, though that small amount was nothing to him. We can't be sure if it was pure happiness or the alcohol taking hold, but he felt a bit lightheaded. Lin Qinsu stepped closer to pull him away, and in doing so, she exposed a faint, dark purple mark on her arm. Lin Mingliang's attention was instantly caught, and his gaze turned sharp. An indescribable rage began to bubble within him, fueled by the protective instinct he felt for his sister. Seeing her arm, he suddenly stood up, threw his bowl aside, and grabbed Chunghwa by the collar, furiously demanding to know what he had done to his sister's hand. "You said you changed," he roared, believing that a leopard never changes its spots. Chunghwa, for his part, was utterly bewildered by this sudden, violent outburst. He wondered if Lin Mingliang was simply too drunk, or why he was speaking with such sudden hostility. In a way, Chunghwa was responsible for the mark, but not in the way his brother-in-law imagined. However, his silence and blank expression only served to confirm the brother's worst suspicions. Lin Mingliang didn't want to hear excuses. He only believed what he saw. His sister had always been fragile, and seeing such a bruise on her wrist made his heart ache with fury. he threw a punch, shouting, "You bastard, how dare you mistreat my sister?" The blow was sudden and heavy, catching Chunghwa completely off guard. He nearly fell, clutching his aching cheek, but he didn't strike back. He only repeated over and over that there was a misunderstanding and that he hadn't touched her. Lin Chinsu quickly rushed forward to hold her brother back, explaining anxiously that the injury was an accident she caused herself and had nothing to do with her husband. "Sister, if you have a grievance, just say it," he insisted. "If you divorce him and come back, our family will never let you go hungry." And who could blame him for wanting to protect her? Regardless of the chaos, Lin Chinsu felt deeply moved, though she knew her brother was mistaken this time. With a flushed face, she could only lean in and whisper a few urgent words into his ear. After listening, Lin Mingliang looked at her with surprise. Then, under his steady gaze, she stood on her tiptoes to whisper something else to clarify the situation. Lin Mingliang looked at his sister, and seeing her nod, and realizing she wasn't lying, he finally, slowly, let go of Chingua's shirt. The anger in his heart didn't vanish completely, but he managed to restrain himself from attacking again. To be honest, his suspicion was perfectly normal given Chingua's past behavior. In his previous life, Chinghua had been a fool who constantly mistreated Lin Chinsu, so he didn't even try to defend himself. Seeing his bleeding lip, she felt a sharp pang of sympathy. She knew her brother acted out of protection, but she also knew Chinghua was innocent this time. She glared at him, thinking that if he hadn't been such a troublemaker before, this wouldn't have happened. After muttering with her for a while, Lin Mingliang still found it hard to believe someone could bruise their arm like that while cooking. Yet, seeing his sister's shy expression, it seemed to be the truth. Lin Mingliang wasn't the type to apologize, so he simply growled that if Chinghua ever dared to strike her, he would face the consequences. Chinghua, of course, promised he never would. He assured them over and over that he would treat Chinsu well. After this storm passed, we see that even Lin Mingliang's attitude toward him began to soften slightly. Later, as they walked home, Chinghua leaned his large frame against his wife, resting his chin on her shoulder and repeatedly calling her wife in a drunken haze. Fortunately, there were no pedestrians on the road to witness his antics, saving Lin Chinsu from total embarrassment. She wondered why this man had suddenly become such a clingy drunk. In the past, alcohol made him violent and aggressive if anything displeased him, but now, he followed her closely like a persistent shadow, refusing to let go. His words were slurred and repetitive, but they carried a strange sincerity. It seemed that, in his own way, he was finally trying to tell her the truth about how he felt. He played with her hand, seemingly unable to believe that she could actually be happy with him, or perhaps he was just lost in his own joyful, drunken world. He was completely focused on her. His usual guard dropped entirely in this moment of vulnerability. Even after being scolded by his wife for his behavior, he simply straightened up and continued to follow her obediently, like a well-trained pup. A few days later, we find him preparing his gear to head into the mountains. His main goal today was to test a very specific theory he had developed. Recently, he had gathered what he thought was wild celery to season their food, but he discovered he couldn't store it in his magical space. At first, he feared the space was broken. Not daring to eat it, he took the plant to the village clinic, where the doctor informed him it wasn't celery at all, but poisonous hemlock. Hemlock and wild celery look remarkably similar, but every part of the hemlock plant is deadly. Consuming it would have been a fatal mistake. This poisonous plant can cause burning and swelling in the mouth, severe diarrhea, and respiratory failure. In the worst cases, death can follow within just 10 hours. To show his gratitude to the man who essentially saved his life, Chinghua gave the village doctor 2 packs of cigarettes and a rabbit before preparing to leave. The doctor secretly handed him a botanical book and warned him not to eat unknown mountain plants, even tucking in some homemade insect repellent. Meanwhile, Chinghua suspected his space could detect toxins. As he walked along the small green path, he knelt down occasionally, parting the grass in search of something. Before long, he discovered many wild mushrooms, some of which looked quite appetizing. He began gathering mushrooms like shiitakes and placing them into his space. It was exactly as he predicted. Those brightly colored mushrooms that looked poisonous at first glance simply couldn't be stored. It seemed his magical space had an additional function, poison detection. But beyond testing plants, he also wanted to test his own movements and agility. We see him gliding through the forest with caution, every step agile and deliberate. Whenever he hears the rustle of leaves around him, he reacts instantly. With practiced skill, he draws his slingshot and loads the ammunition. The projectile flies with incredible speed and precision toward a damp area where a creature is slithering. The creature's body is fluid and sleek, and after it stops moving, he prepares to process his catch. After securing the area, he sits down to examine his prize, looking for the gallbladder among the remains. Eventually, he carefully slides his knife through the specimen he has gathered. This action requires a steady hand and a bit of patience as he works. Finally, he locates the gallbladder he was looking for. He carefully aligns the bile duct with the opening of the gallbladder, makes a precise cut, and then removes the outer fatty membrane. He stored it away with great care. Both the gallbladder and the snake meat could be kept separately within the safety of his space. After dealing with that, he looked at the rest of the snake's body, moving it with his hand as a thought occurred to him. He found himself wondering if his wife actually enjoyed the taste of snake meat. Snake meat is quite a delicacy, after all, tender and flavorful if prepared correctly. He decided he would take it home and ask her first. If she didn't want to eat it, he could always take it to the market to sell. He felt fortunate to have his magical space now. Otherwise, preserving a gallbladder like this would have been nearly impossible. He then pulled a bottle of erguoto liquor from his space and popped it open. Into the bottle, he carefully placed more than a dozen gallbladders to infuse with the spirits. Besides drying them out, soaking them in alcohol is the best way to keep fresh gallbladders preserved for the long haul. Suddenly, the clear, sharp calls of 2 pheasants echoed through the nearby woods. In the absolute silence of the mountain forest, the sound seemed particularly loud, almost startling. He only needed to listen for a moment before quickly pulling his slingshot and ammunition from his belt. With a sharp whistle, the projectile traced a smooth arc through the evening air, looking very much like a shooting star. It flew fast and true toward a pheasant that, until that very second, had been hopping happily through the brush. The poor bird had no time to react before it was struck by the rapidly flying projectile. It lost its vitality instantly and fell to the forest floor, unable to move another inch. He approached quickly and gently picked up the pheasant, which still had the ammunition lodged within it. Chicken and mushrooms, a perfect combination and a classic for a reason. We return to the house as he calls out to his wife, setting the 2 baskets down in the courtyard. Lin Qingshui took a quick look, wondering if he had managed a good harvest for the day. While he was washing his hands, he turned to Lin Qingshui and asked her a simple question. He asked if she ate snake meat, but Lin Qingshui only gave the catch a skeptical side-eye. It was a large, patterned snake, looking quite formidable even after its journey from the mountains. Just looking at it was enough to make her stomach turn, let alone the thought of actually eating it. She gave a firm refusal, making it very clear that snake was definitely not on her personal menu. He realized then that she truly had no taste for it, so he placed the snake back in the basket with a hint of regret. He made sure to cover it with plenty of grass, mostly to spare his wife from having to look at it again. After their meal was finished, he returned to the baskets and, after washing up, began to pull out the mushrooms. He also set aside the shiitake mushrooms he had gathered, preparing them to be dried for later use. After that, he washed some of the wild vegetables and used the rest to start a batch of pickles. He worked quickly in the kitchen, and before long, he was calling Lin Qingshui over to come and eat. She couldn't help but wonder why the soup tasted so incredibly delicious. Lin Qingshui asked him about it curiously, as this was just a simple soup made from mountain greens and mushrooms. He explained that he had gathered a lot, wanting to dry the extra harvest so they would have vegetables during the winter. It really was delicious, and Lin Qingshui praised his cooking while she helped herself to the vegetables. To be honest, she didn't actually have a very large appetite. For her, a single pancake and a warm bowl of soup were more than enough to feel satisfied. However, we see him remind her that one cannot simply pick these things at random. Some varieties are quite poisonous, especially for those who don't know how to recognize them. Zhao warned her that eating the wrong kind by mistake could be fatal, a sobering thought, indeed. Lin Qingshui looked at him, wondering how it was that he had become so knowledgeable about such things. He simply chalked it up to the power of knowledge, claiming he could spot a poisonous mushroom at a glance. Lin Qingshui didn't press him further. She simply found that she liked the man he had become. He was much better than before, she told herself. We moved then to the following evening. After bathing and putting on clean clothes, he took Lin Qingshui to his 4th uncle's house. The one getting married was the son of a distant uncle. Family ties can be quite complex, after all. In their village, the custom was for the new wife to officially join the household the next day. But tonight, it was time for friends and family to gather, sit down, and share a celebratory meal. As the evening gets underway, we see the men sitting at a separate table, ready to start drinking. The women, meanwhile, gather at their own table to enjoy the meal and share a bit of gossip. At that moment, the 4th aunt walked toward the women's table, carrying a large jar in her arms. She sat down and explained that it was her homemade fruit wine, low in alcohol and not likely to make anyone drunk. She encouraged them to have a drink, smiling as she noted how well he treats and spoils his wife. Perhaps a bit worried about causing offense, the 4th aunt reached for the bowl in front of Lin Qingshui first. She poured her a full serving, warmly insisting that Qingshui give it a try. It was sweet and smooth, without any harshness. Lin Qingshui looked down at the fruit wine in her bowl. She lifted it and caught a light, sweet aroma before finally taking a small sip. While it wasn't exactly sugary, it did have a pleasant, slightly tart edge to it. The flavor was actually quite good, and since it lacked that sharp burn, it didn't really feel like wine at all. It felt more like a soft drink, really. Just then, Zhang Wan's daughter-in-law, sitting nearby, couldn't help herself. Gathering her courage, she leaned in close to Lin Qingshui's ear and whispered her name. She warned her to keep a close eye on her man, calling Zhang Qiushuo a despicable person who refused to behave. She pointed out how he insisted on sitting right next to her husband at the men's table, acting far too friendly. Lin Qingshui followed her gaze, glancing sideways at the son-in-law, standing not too far away. She watched as Zhang Wui busied himself, diligently pouring drinks for everyone. He went from man to man, looking very much like a fawning lapdog, which, to be honest, was a bit much. She eventually looked away and offered a small smile to the daughter-in-law from the Wang family beside her. She said nothing, and seeing her so unbothered, the woman realized that Qing Shui seemed quite different today. God knows the aunt's heart nearly sank to her feet when she saw you bringing her to the party. She was terrified that one of the guests today might say the wrong thing and spark a massive fight. As it turns out, the two daughters-in-law of the Wang family haven't dared to step outside lately. Their faces are reportedly swollen like pig heads, a rather unpleasant sight, to be sure. Word is they said some nasty things about Lin Qingshui and were promptly beaten for it. Lin Qingshui, meanwhile, looked so radiant and fresh she seemed as if she could glow. Her figure was flawless, and one could catch the faint, delicate scent of a light fragrance around her. Never mind the men, even she, as a woman, found herself completely captivated. She simply couldn't look away, which, in a place like this, was truly a rare thing. We are all women here, she thought, so how could someone be born looking quite so perfect? Lin Qingshui eventually noticed the daughter-in-law from the Wang family staring at her from the side. She lifted her fruit wine and addressed the woman beside her as the elder sister of the Wang family. She suggested they share a drink. Hearing herself called elder sister, the woman's honest, tanned face lit up with a smile as she drank with her. She told the younger sister to come to her with anything, for though she'd only been married a year longer, she knew the village ways well. Seeing that Lin Qingshui was so easy to get along with, the other women breathed a sigh of relief and began to chat freely. Meanwhile, Zhang Wui was sitting nearby, intentionally brushing her leg against yours under the table every now and then. Zhang Wui drank a bit of wine on purpose, pretending to be dizzy so she could lean on you, becoming more persistent the more you avoided her. When the party ended, the Wang daughter-in-law saw Zhang Wui harassing you and called out for Lin Qingshui to come over quickly. You walked over with long strides, taking your wife's hand and pulling her close by the waist while asking if they had given her wine. The Wang daughter-in-law explained cheerfully that it was just the aunt's fruit wine, never imagining it could actually make Lin Qingshui drunk. She leaned softly into your arms, her long, beautiful eyes shimmering with a sleepy drunkenness while her flushed, damp face glowed and her crimson lips parted slightly. She muttered that you smelled a bit, before demanding that you hold her, reaching out with her slender white arms to embrace your firm, lean waist. This display slightly embarrassed the more conservative women nearby, and to be honest, you hadn't expected your wife to be quite so adorable when she was tipsy. Without another thought, you lifted the drunken woman into your arms and walked with steady strides away from the uncle's house toward your own home. You had planned to stop by your sister-in-laws to pick up the children, but seeing Lin Qingshui so intoxicated, we see you had to abandon that idea. All the way home, she was restless in your arms, her small white hands wandering randomly until she eventually tore a button right off your shirt collar. You resisted the urge to react there in the fields, and fortunately, it was dark enough that there weren't many people on the road to witness the scene. Once inside, you carried her straight to the bedroom and laid her on the bed before heading out to the courtyard to clear your head. You lit a cigarette and took a long, deep drag, trying to calm your racing heart after such an eventful walk home. The next morning, Lin Qingshui was startled awake by the sound of firecrackers. She sat up groggily, leaning against the headboard as memories began to flicker back. She remembered going to the uncle's house and finding the fruit wine so delicious that she had clearly overindulged, though the rest was a bit of a blur. Hearing her moving inside, you approached the door and told her it was time to get up, as the new bride was about to arrive in the village. Lin Qingshui finished dressing and pulled back the curtain, asking where the children were and worrying if they were bothering her sister-in-law too much. You reassured her that it was fine, and after a quick wash in the courtyard, she followed you out to join the growing crowd of villagers. The small courtyard of the Qin family was already packed, and as you arrived, Zhang Wui spotted you immediately, standing tall like a heron among chickens. Lin Qingshui still felt a lingering sense of embarrassment from the night before, but you simply took her arm and told her to hold on to you. She was your lawful wife, after all, so there was no harm in holding her arm. You glanced at her and told her quite seriously not to drink with others again. Your magnetic voice carried an unquestionable authority, leaving Lin Qingshui confused as she looked up at your stern expression. That was when she noticed your open collar, revealing tooth marks and faint scratches that you couldn't quite hide, leaving her momentarily stunned. She wondered if she had caused a scene in her drunken state, and despite thinking she had grown a thick skin, she felt her cheeks begin to burn. Her cheeks flushed a deep, embarrassed red, and as we see you look down at her glowing face, you can't help but wonder if Lin Qingshui is simply overwhelmed with shame. She acted immediately, shooting you an angry, inquisitive look that seemed to ask what you were staring at, before pinching your waist and demanding you only look at her. A slight, amused smile played across your thin lips at her possessiveness. You took one last look at her new clothes before turning your attention back to the crowd. As we watch the newlyweds in the distance, we notice Zhang Wui observing your every move, her heart heavy with a profound and bitter sadness. She couldn't help but think that everything Lin Qingshui now possessed should have been hers, deeply regretting that she ever listened to her family's claims that you were a hopeless hoodlum. She told herself she couldn't give up on a man as capable as you. After all, in terms of looks and skill, Brother Chunghwa was far superior to any other prospect. Compared to her current blind date, you were a much better catch, and she felt that with your abilities, she would never want for meat or new clothes again. With that thought, Zhang Wui adjusted her clothes and ponytail, pushing through the crowd until she stood before the two of you, speaking with forced affection. She offered you a bottle of soda, but you simply stood there with one hand in your pocket and the other supporting your wife, who was still clinging to your arm. You looked at Zhang Wui with complete indifference, telling her to drink it herself as you weren't thirsty, just as the crowd began to rowdily tease the groom. The wedding guests started to get a bit carried away with their antics, and in the middle of the chaos, things began to take a turn for the frantic. Amidst the noise and the pushing, the atmosphere of the celebration shifted, and it became clear that the situation was becoming difficult to navigate for some. The crowd pressed in closer, and despite the festive occasion, the sheer number of people made the small space feel increasingly cramped and unpredictable. You managed to grab a tray of snacks from the air and decided it was time to head home. But meanwhile, Zhang Wui found herself trapped in the throng. She couldn't break free from the crowd and felt several hands touching her randomly in the confusion. For an unmarried woman, it was a deeply distressing moment. Embarrassed and frightened, she tried to escape, but someone pushed her again, and in the struggle, the buttons on her shirt were torn away, revealing her undershirt. With tears in her eyes, she covered her chest with both hands, looking desperately through the crowd for the one person she hoped would save her. It was only then that she realized you were already gone, shielding Lin Qingshui in your arms as you left. In her despair, she cried out your name, Chunghwa. Her cry was drowned out by the noise, while Lin Qingshui kept her eyes fixed on you, admiring your handsome, sharp features and understanding why others were so envious. She realized why Zhang Wui was so desperate to be her children's stepmother, and as she leaned into you, you quickly reached out a long arm to steady her. He hooked his arm around her slender waist, pulling her into his embrace, though his jealousy didn't exactly arrive in silence as he told her to watch her step. Leaning against his firm, broad chest, Lin Qingshui finally breathed a sigh of relief, thankful she hadn't fallen flat on her face while walking by his side. Her eyes remained fixed on him, while elsewhere, the wedding festivities had ended. Once the groom's crowd dispersed, we see Zhang Wui's clothes were left in tatters. Because there were so many people present, no one admitted to the rough handling during the chaos, leaving Zhang Wui to sob breathlessly without any comfort from the onlookers. Not a single person stepped forward to defend her until her mother heard the news and arrived in a hurry to slowly lead her back home. Word of the incident spread quickly through the village, eventually reaching Zhang Wui's fiancé, who, instead of defending her, immediately broke off their engagement. Naturally, this became the main topic of conversation at every meal, until months later, the day arrived to set the main beam of your new house. Standing on the ladder, you firmly placed the final beam with your own hands as the sound of firecrackers echoed and red fragments fell like petals against the brick. The two-story building gleamed under the autumn sun with its bright glass windows, the very first of its kind in the entire village of Zahojia. We see you standing in the courtyard holding your daughter, yet your eyes never stopped searching for Lin Qingshui, who stood by the stove in a red sweater. In the steaming pot, the wild boar you brought from the mountain was cooking, its aroma drifting through the village while she worked until sweat beaded on her forehead. With her cheeks flushed, she occasionally looked up at you, though she would quickly look away whenever your gazes happened to meet. Li Tiantian approached her with a bowl, whispering that her brother's eyes seemed to follow her everywhere, which caused Lin Qingshui's ears to turn a deep red. After dark, the workers gradually dispersed, and since the new house wasn't quite dry yet, the family of three slept in the east room of the old house. With your daughter asleep in her small bed, you lay on the mat, using the moonlight from the window to watch the person sleeping soundly in your arms. Lin Qingshui leaned against your arm, her breathing soft and warm. You leaned down to kiss the crown of her head, and she merely snuggled closer. You stared at the soot-blackened ceiling beams, remembering how in your previous life, you would likely have been lying drunk at a gambling table at this hour. Back then, you wouldn't have known your wife and child were hungry, but now, the person in your arms was warm and breathing steadily beside you. Suddenly, you felt that the luck you have in this life is worth more than all the money you ever earned before, and so, the next morning arrived. Before dawn, you rose to the kitchen to thinly slice the leftover wild boar and beat 2 eggs, steaming a fresh bowl of custard for the family. Lin Qingshui stepped out with the child in her arms, finding breakfast already served on the table. After eating, he planned to head over to the new house. The morning air was crisp, and the little girl remained safely tucked away as she looked out across the courtyard toward the new building, where the windows didn't even have their glass installed yet. Instead, they used plastic sheets to temporarily block the wind, and she stood there, peering through that thin, translucent layer into the empty rooms. It was no longer dark and dirty like before. Now, the walls were white as snow, the cement floors were smooth, and the sun brightened every corner. For a moment, she suddenly remembered the year they were first married, living in that same old house that let in the winter wind and the summer rain. She looked down at her sleeping daughter and then back at the two small brick structures, feeling as though she were caught in a beautiful dream. At sunset, we see you returning on your new bicycle, a sturdy double-bar 28, with a bundle of wood tied to the back and a bag of brown sugar on the handlebars. Lin Qingshui was sitting in the courtyard with the child, her red sweater bathed in the warm, golden glow of the setting sun as you entered. You set the bike down, took the child in one arm, and reached for her hand with the other, leading her toward the new house to take a look. You pushed open the wooden door, and as you stood there together, you could see that the home was almost ready for them. Looking at the windows covered in white paper, she started to say something about the future, but you didn't let her finish, pulling her into a hug from behind. Resting your chin on her shoulder, you promised that from now on, every day would be like this. Just then, the baby woke up and reached out her tiny hands. Lin Qingshui looked at her, the corners of her mouth curling into a slow smile as the sky outside finally faded into total darkness. In the distance, lamps flickered to life, casting a soft yellow light through the paper windows while the village dogs barked once or twice before falling silent. Holding your wife and child close, listening to their steady breathing, you felt an incredible sense of peace you had never known before. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside as Li Tiantian returned from next door, knocking carefully on the hall door to announce she was back. Lin Qingshui pulled away, blushing slightly as she went to open the door, but you watched her back and suddenly called out to her, calling her wife. She turned around with a doubtful look, and when you only smiled, she gave you a playful, reproving glance before turning to greet Li Tiantian. As we look out into the dark night, the little girl babbles and playfully scratches your face. You lean down to kiss her soft cheek, whispering that our good days are only just beginning. She had been married to this man for over 2 years, yet in this moment, she felt as if the fragile version of him had vanished, replaced by someone both familiar and strangely new. Deep down, she felt she had never truly known him, and for a moment, she wondered which version was real. Only days ago, he was a man who loved drinking and gambling. He had even considered selling his own daughter to pay his debts, but lately, he had become a different person, staying home and showing her nothing but affection every single day. Whether he was hunting in the mountains or selling medicinal herbs, the money he brought home for her to save soon surpassed even that of the Lao Wan family. The Lao Wans were the wealthiest in the village, owners of the grocery store, and people said he had incredible luck as he never returned from the mountains empty-handed. But today, seeing this professional and incredible sketch of a house, she wondered how many more hidden skills he was keeping from her. She looked away from the drawing. She gazed at his calm, defined face, feeling as though he were an inexhaustible treasure that surprised her constantly, and she wondered if she could truly keep him forever. She was lost in thought when Zhao Tsinghua set down his ruler and pencil to head to the kitchen. Turning around, he realized his wife had been standing right behind him. He had been so absorbed in his work that he hadn't noticed her at all. Seeing her staring at the sketches, he reached out and gently stroked her soft, pale cheeks. He asked with a smile what was wrong, and though Lin Qingshui was about to ask how he knew all these things, they were interrupted by the sudden arrival of his elder brother. She pushed the thought aside and went into the kitchen, while Zhao Tsinghua watched her go, sensing her expression was a bit odd, though he didn't dwell on it for long. He looked toward the approaching Zhao Tsingxin and called out to him. The elder brother nodded in approval, crouching in the courtyard to tend to his pipe. He gently tapped the ashes onto his cloth shoe, pulled a small bag from his pocket, and began filling the pipe with tobacco while murmuring about the construction team. He complained that the labor was outrageously expensive and questioned why he insisted on hiring city builders when a dozen-strong village men could build walls just as well. To his brother, spending such unnecessary money seemed foolish, especially since the house design was so complex that only a retired engineer would even agree to take the job. Hearing his brother's words, Zhao Tsinghua understood that the older man was simply worried about the cost. He calmly gathered his sketches from the stone table. He handed his brother a cigarette and explained that the money didn't matter, as he only wanted to build a house where Qingshui and Niu could live comfortably. Zhao Tsingxin paused, looking at his younger brother. He wanted to argue that Niu was just a girl, but seeing that determined expression, he swallowed his words. With a sigh, he reminded him that building behind the old house would be incredibly expensive, and as he spoke, he couldn't help but worry about the scale of the project. The situation had become quite surreal, as the whispers of the villagers began to follow them everywhere, creating a heavy atmosphere that had lingered for far too long. In these spaces of survival, everyone was watching closely as he prepared to claim his own place and make a stand for his family. The elder brother, who had seen so many workers come and go, simply sat there and smoked in a heavy, thoughtful silence. He found himself unable to truly grasp how his fourth younger brother had managed to change so drastically in such a short time. Suddenly, the man had become wealthy and, more importantly, had abandoned every single one of those self-destructive habits. This was certainly a wonderful development, and the elder brother was happier than anyone to see him finally settling down into a stable life. And yet, he couldn't help but notice that his brother was spending money like water, with seemingly no concept of how to save. To be honest, no matter how much money he had, he was bound to waste it all if he continued down this reckless path. He continued to smoke in silence for a long while, exhaling thick clouds of smoke before finally speaking with a tone of deep gravity. He reminded him that he was no longer a young man and that, as his elder brother, his only hope was for a better future. He wanted him and his wife to enjoy a stable life, telling him not to worry about the construction materials for the new house. The elder brother promised he would source them himself, and with that final word, he stood up and took his leave. Once he was gone, Zhao Tsinghua hurried into the kitchen to find his wife, who was busy shelling green beans for their meal. He gently told her to go out and rest, suggesting that if she felt bored, she should go and visit some of their neighbors. As he spoke, he reached out and began to untie the apron from around his wife's waist with practiced ease. He tied it onto himself instead. By now, Lin Qingshui had slowly grown accustomed to this unusual role reversal. Whenever he was home, he simply refused to let her cook, so she decided not to argue with him this time. She stepped outside as he asked, but she didn't actually go to visit anyone in the village. After all, with her husband busy cooking at home, she felt it wouldn't be right to just wander off and leave him to the work. Reflecting on the conversation he had just shared with his brother, she realized he wasn't at all like the man he used to be. We see him planning to build 3 houses of blue brick and tile, though she never expected him to harbor such grand ambitions. Since he intended to construct a small 2-story building, he had already begun working on a rough draft of the design. The house he was planning was the kind of home that, usually, only the wealthiest people in the city could ever afford. Because he truly wanted to build something of that scale, she found herself completely taken aback by the sheer boldness of his idea. She couldn't help but cast a questioning glance toward the kitchen, watching his every move. There was that tall, busy figure. Before they were married, even her sister-in-law had mentioned his reputation. He was the youngest child in the family, and his parents had spoiled him rotten since the day he was born. Supposedly, he didn't even know how to cook, and his sister-in-law was the one who always had to wash his clothes. But now, as we observe his current skill in the kitchen, the transformation is quite remarkable. Moving like a professional chef, the dishes he fried smelled so delicious they made her mouth water instantly. He supposedly couldn't cook, yet he certainly didn't look like someone standing at a stove for the first time. She simply sat there in the courtyard, her mind filled with a growing sense of doubt. Watching him silently, as he busied himself in the kitchen, she found herself thinking about it all without pause. Later that night, we find the two of them lying in bed together as the house grew quiet. Lin Qingshui tossed and turned restlessly, finding it absolutely impossible to fall asleep. Finally, she couldn't help herself and turned over to look him directly in the face. Resting her head on her hand, she tentatively whispered his name, asking, "Zhenghua?" She wondered aloud how he knew how to draw blueprints, especially with all the technical data marked so clearly. Hearing his wife's sudden question, Zhao Zhenghua, who was caught completely off guard, suddenly tensed up. Then he relaxed, pulling her gently into his arms and letting her head rest comfortably in the crook of his elbow. With his chin resting on the top of her head, his gaze was deep, staring straight ahead, without any particular focus. He spoke slowly, admitting that there were some things he simply didn't know how to tell her. Having said that, he paused, as he held her tightly. However, he discovered something quite unexpected. Deep down, he felt there were certain things that were just impossible to explain. Zhao Zhenghua stopped for a moment, pulling his wife closer as her soft fragrance completely enveloped him. It was a light, pleasant scent, and in that moment, he felt an incredible sense of peace and security. To be honest, he had never felt this way before, regardless of how much money he had earned in his previous life. "Wife, I hope you can trust me," he whispered, promising to prove with the rest of his life that she wasn't wrong to choose him. The truth of his rebirth was simply too absurd, even by the standards of the 21st century. If he told anyone, they surely wouldn't believe him. They'd think he had a mental problem and send him to a psychiatric hospital. And while we know that certain platforms are full of stories about rebirth and transmigration, in reality, the connection between a past life and the present remains completely inexplicable to science. Even he had his doubts, occasionally wondering if his current situation was actually some kind of mental breakdown. Therefore, he couldn't reveal the truth to his wife, especially in an era that wasn't yet fully open to such ideas. Stories of ghosts and gods were strictly taboo. If word got out, he risked being arrested. He could be criticized or even paraded through the streets. After all, we remember what happened to the village healer. Even with reforms beginning, being labeled with such a stigma would be absolutely terrible for him. He wouldn't be able to progress in the short term, and even his wife and children would be subjected to judgmental glares. And so, the secret of his rebirth remained his alone, known by no one else. How could he possibly tell his wife? He decided it was best to keep it hidden, if only to save her from worrying too much. Thinking about all of this, he let out a secret sigh, feeling incredibly fortunate for the way things were turning out. Fortunately, it seemed God had given him a genuine chance to start over and fix his past mistakes. He knew he had to make the most of this opportunity to compensate his wife and children for everything he owed them. He told her to stay by his side and be at peace, promising that he had already cleared the path ahead for her. He then suggested, almost as an afterthought, that she might enjoy reading some books in her spare time. He also noted that those two people living in the cowshed weren't having an easy time of it either. Meanwhile, we see Lin In Su, who was still held tightly in his warm embrace. With her hands resting against his firm chest, enveloped in his clean, masculine scent, she found herself drifting into a memory. She was thinking of the rather scandalous things that happened after returning with him, barely hearing a word he was saying. Just thinking about how wanton she must have looked beneath him made her entire body feel like it was on fire. To be honest, she didn't quite understand how she had become this way so suddenly. Her fingers nervously toyed with the fabric of the small undershirt covering his chest. Fearing he might notice her embarrassment, she quickly told him it was nothing and that they should just go to sleep. In that precise moment, if Zhao Jinghua had only bothered to look down at her, he would have realized his wife's face was flushed bright red all the way to her ears. But instead, hearing her request to turn out the light, he obediently reached out and pulled the cord of the bedside bulb. That night, the two of them slept soundly in each other's arms until the first light of dawn began to break. As was his habit, Zhao Jinghua woke early to prepare food, warming up the leftover stir-fried meat. He placed some steamed buns in the pot and, with his basket slung over his shoulder, set off toward the mountain. Guided by the vivid memories of his previous life, Zhao Jinghua easily found the familiar shortcut leading up the slopes.